On the 11th of July in 1997, scientists operating the Equatorial Pacific Ocean Autonomous Hydrophone Array detected an extraordinarily powerful underwater sound that would come to be known simply as the bloop, a mysterious acoustic event that traveled across thousands of miles of ocean and registered on multiple detection stations simultaneously with a frequency signature unlike anything previously recorded in the marine environment. The sound itself lasted approximately 90 seconds and possessed such intensity and clarity that it immediately captured the attention of researchers at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, who possessed some of the most sophisticated acoustic monitoring equipment on the planet, yet even they could not immediately identify its source or nature. The characteristics of the bloop were distinctly organic in quality, meaning it possessed acoustic properties that suggested biological origin rather than mechanical or geological explanation, and the frequency range and duration pattern suggested something of truly massive proportions moving through the deep water, potentially something far larger than any creature known to science or documented throughout human history. The psychological impact of this discovery cannot be understated, as it represented a fundamental gap in human knowledge about our own planet, a direct reminder that vast regions of the Earth remain unexplored and that we genuinely do not understand everything that inhabits our oceans, creating a profound sense of mystery and uncertainty that captured the imagination of both scientific communities and the general public alike. In attempting to understand how such a mystery could persist in the modern era despite our technological capabilities, we must recognize that the ocean covers more than 70% of Earth's surface, and that humans have explored less than 5% of it, meaning that entire ecosystems and organisms could theoretically exist beyond our current knowledge. And the deep ocean presents an environment so extreme and inaccessible that our detection methods rely entirely on indirect sensing rather than direct observation. Yet despite the initial fascination and mystery surrounding the bloop, the event has receded from public consciousness and scientific discourse with remarkable ease, largely because researchers eventually developed plausible explanations attributing the sound to various natural phenomena including whale vocalizations, icequakes from breaking glaciers, or underwater geological activity, explanations that seem to have satisfied our collective need for rational resolution. In the crushing darkness of the Antarctic deep, where sunlight has never penetrated and pressure would instantly collapse the human body, there exists a creature so massive and so alien that we have only glimpsed it a handful of times in all of recorded history. The colossal squid, scientifically known as Mesonychoteuthis hamiltoni, represents one of the ocean's most formidable and enigmatic predators, a being that dwells in depths between 2,000 and 3,000 meters below the surface, where the water temperature hovers just above freezing and darkness is absolute. What makes this creature particularly terrifying is not merely its size, though specimens have been recorded at lengths exceeding 14 meters with eyes the size of dinner plates, but rather the profound mystery that surrounds its behavior, its hunting methods, and its role within the deep ocean ecosystem. We know very little about how it lives because we almost never encounter it alive. Our knowledge comes almost entirely from dead specimens that have washed ashore or been found in the stomachs of sperm whales that dive to hunt in these lightless abysses. The colossal squid possesses rotating hooks along its tentacles, weapons of almost medieval brutality that suggest violent encounters with prey or potential rivals, yet we have never witnessed these creatures hunting, never observed their courtship, never documented their social structures or breeding behaviors. Scientists theorize that these massive beings may engage in battles with equally large sperm whales, creating a drama of titanic struggle happening silently in complete darkness kilometers below any human observation. Yet this remains entirely speculative. The psychological mechanism that makes the colossal squid so frightening operates on multiple levels. There is the primal fear of the unknown, the recognition that an intelligent creature of remarkable size exists in an environment completely beyond our reach or understanding, and the uncomfortable awareness that entire species may live complex lives in the deep ocean without our knowledge or consent. We have normalized this mystery, accepting it as simply another unsolved aspect of marine biology, yet the colossal squid persists as a reminder that our planet still harbors secrets in its most remote regions, creatures whose existence challenges our assumptions about where life can thrive and what forms intelligence might take in the unexplored depths beneath us. Perhaps most humbling of all is the recognition that despite our technological advances and scientific achievements, the colossal squid remains fundamentally indifferent to our attempts at understanding, continuing its existence in the abyss according to imperatives we can only dimly imagine, a silent testament to the limits of human knowledge. Deep beneath the surface of the western Pacific Ocean, nearly 7 miles down in near-absolute darkness, exists a place so remote and so fundamentally hostile to human exploration that we know more about the surface of the moon than we know about the deepest parts of our own planet. The Mariana Trench, located near the Mariana Islands, represents the lowest point in all of Earth's oceans at approximately 35,800 feet below sea level, a depth so extreme that the pressure at the bottom reaches over 1,000 times what we experience at the surface. The few exploratory missions that have ventured to this abyssal realm have encountered bizarre and alien forms of life that seem to defy the laws of biology as we understand them. Organisms that have adapted to crushing pressures and total absence of light through mechanisms we still struggle to comprehend. The darkness at these depths is so complete and so perpetual that it is not merely an absence of light, but rather a fundamental aspect of existence itself. A darkness that has persisted unchanged for millions of years while the world above it transformed entirely. What makes the Mariana Trench particularly unsettling is not merely the physical extremes we find there, but rather the realization that despite possessing advanced technology and scientific knowledge, we have barely scratched the surface of understanding what actually inhabits these regions. Our psychological discomfort with the Mariana Trench stems from a primal sense of the unknown, from the understanding that there exist places on our own world that remain as mysterious and inaccessible to us as distant star systems, places where we have sent fewer exploratory missions than we have sent to outer space, leaving vast territories completely uncharted and their inhabitants undocumented. Yet we have normalized this profound gap in our knowledge, choosing instead to focus our scientific attention and resources elsewhere, perhaps because the extreme danger and the astronomical costs of deep ocean exploration make it seem somehow less urgent than other pursuits, even though these depths represent a final frontier on our own planet, a realm that continues to guard its secrets with an almost deliberate indifference to our attempts at understanding it. The few creatures we have managed to document, translucent jellyfish, eyeless fish with bioluminescent lures, and amphipods that somehow thrive in the suffocating pressure, represent only the smallest fraction of what likely exists in those crushing depths, a humbling reminder that Earth's most extreme environments remain fundamentally alien to human experience and comprehension. Deep beneath the surface of our oceans lies a mystery that has captivated human imagination for centuries, a creature so impossibly massive that its very existence defies our understanding of marine biology and evolutionary possibility. The Megalodon, a prehistoric shark that ruled the seas approximately 16 to 3.6 million years ago, represents perhaps the largest predatory fish ever to have lived on Earth, with scientists estimating that some specimens may have reached lengths of 60 feet or more, dwarfing even the modern great white shark by an alarming margin. What makes this creature particularly fascinating is not merely its colossal size, but rather the persistent mystery surrounding its extinction and the tantalizing questions that remain about whether such a creature could somehow have survived in the deepest, most unexplored regions of our planetary oceans, regions we have mapped less thoroughly than we have mapped the surface of the moon. The human mind has constructed an elaborate psychological framework around this possibility, drawing from our fundamental fear of the unknown combined with our awareness that vast portions of our oceans remain completely unexplored and fundamentally unknowable to us. We understand logically that megalodon extinction was driven by climate change, the disappearance of its preferred prey species, and the competitive pressure from evolving marine predators. Yet we continue to harbor a deep, almost primal fascination with the idea that somewhere in the absolute darkness of the abyssal zone, a creature of impossible proportions might still be gliding silently through the water, waiting to be discovered. This persistence of belief in megalodon's possible survival represents our difficulty in truly accepting the finality of extinction, our unwillingness to acknowledge that vast stretches of geological time have completely erased entire worlds of creatures that once dominated their environments. Despite overwhelming paleontological evidence and a complete absence of any credible sightings or biological evidence in modern times, the megalodon endures in our collective consciousness as a symbol of the ocean's boundless mysteries and our own deep uncertainty about what truly lurks in those crushing depths beyond our reach. Popular culture has weaponized this uncertainty, spawning countless films, documentaries, and books that pit imaginary megalodon survivors against modern humanity, each retelling reinforcing our desire to believe that nature still harbors secrets capable of humbling our scientific certainty and reminding us of our own smallness in the face of the natural world. In the deepest trenches of the ocean, where sunlight has never penetrated and pressure crushes with incomprehensible force, there exists a creature so rare and so poorly understood that scientists have encountered it fewer than 200 times in recorded history, and each encounter only deepens the mystery rather than providing answers. The Goblin Shark is a living fossil, a deep-sea predator that has remained virtually unchanged for over 100 million years, swimming through the absolute darkness of the abyssal zone in a form so alien and otherworldly that it seems less like a product of evolution and more like something engineered from our collective nightmares. With its elongated snout resembling the long nose of a goblin from folklore, its semi-translucent flesh that appears almost ghostly white or pale pink depending on the depth and available light, and its extendable jaws that can shoot forward with startling speed to capture unsuspecting prey. This creature embodies everything that makes the deep ocean so profoundly unsettling to the human imagination. When specimens have been brought to the surface, marine biologists have struggled to explain how such an unusual body plan could have persisted for so long, why its hunting strategies seem so inefficient compared to other sharks, and what exactly comprises the majority of its diet in an environment where food sources are scattered and scarce. The psychological discomfort we experience when contemplating the Goblin Shark stems from a fundamental recognition that this creature represents an entire world operating under completely different rules than our own, where the normal parameters of predation, survival, and evolutionary advantage seem inverted or altogether irrelevant. We have developed elaborate theories about its behavior and ecology, yet every capture and every specimen examination raises more questions than it answers, forcing us to confront the humbling reality that despite centuries of oceanographic advancement, we understand less about the deep sea than we do about the surface of the moon. Yet we continue to accept this profound ignorance with a kind of passive resignation, incorporating the Goblin Shark into our frameworks of knowledge as simply another item in a catalog of deep-sea oddities, a creature we can describe in scientific terms without ever truly understanding, and we sleep soundly with the comfort of knowing these mysteries remain far below us, in the darkness, unchanged and unchanging. Nestled in the western part of the North Atlantic Ocean, between Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, lies a region that has captured the imagination of millions and spawned countless theories of disappearance and mystery. The Bermuda Triangle, often called the Devil's Triangle, encompasses roughly 500,000 square miles of ocean, and within this expanse, numerous vessels and aircraft have vanished without clear explanation, leaving behind only questions and speculation. The most famous disappearance involves Flight 19, a squad of 5 Navy bombers that departed from Fort Lauderdale on December 5, 1945, and never returned, along with the rescue aircraft sent to locate them, vanishing into the Atlantic with no wreckage ever recovered. Other notable losses include the USS Cyclops, a massive cargo ship that disappeared in 1918 with over 300 crew members aboard, and countless private vessels and aircraft that have been swallowed by these waters over the decades. The legend of the Bermuda Triangle grew exponentially throughout the 20th century, fueled by sensationalized accounts and books that attributed the disappearances to supernatural phenomena, extraterrestrial abduction, and dimensional rifts that defied rational explanation. However, the psychological mechanism behind this persistent mystery reveals far more about human nature and our relationship with the unknown than it does about the ocean itself. The human mind is remarkably skilled at pattern recognition, sometimes to the point of finding patterns where none truly exist, and when multiple unrelated events occur within a geographical region, our brains naturally seek to connect them into a cohesive narrative of danger and mystery. The Bermuda Triangle region, while indeed experiencing a significant number of maritime incidents over its recorded history, actually experiences disappearances at rates no higher than any other equally trafficked ocean region of comparable size, and many of the famous cases attributed to the triangle have been substantially distorted or misrepresented in popular accounts. The area experiences extreme weather patterns, powerful currents, sudden storms, and dense fog that can disorient navigation, all of which are logical explanations for maritime incidents rather than evidence of supernatural occurrence. Despite these rational explanations and the absence of any scientifically verifiable phenomena, the Bermuda Triangle remains firmly embedded in our cultural consciousness as a place of danger and inexplicable loss. We continue to tell stories about it, to feature it in documentaries and entertainment, and to reference it as a cultural touchstone for the unknown, even as we acknowledge on an intellectual level that no genuine mystery persists there. In the abyssal depths of the ocean, where sunlight has never penetrated and pressure crushes with unimaginable force, exists a creature so profoundly alien that it challenges our fundamental understanding of what life can become. The anglerfish represents not merely an animal adapted to extreme conditions, but rather a complete inversion of reproductive biology so bizarre that it seems almost impossible such a system could evolve and persist. The female anglerfish, a grotesque form no larger than a few inches, possesses a bioluminescent lure dangling from a modified dorsal fin, which she uses to attract prey in the complete darkness of the deep ocean where no other light exists. The males, however, exist in a state of existence so dependent and parasitic that they barely qualify as separate organisms in any meaningful sense. When a male anglerfish encounters a female in the vast emptiness of the abyss, he attaches himself to her body using his teeth, and over time, his skin fuses with her own, his bloodstream merging completely with hers until he becomes a permanent appendage, entirely dependent on her for nutrition and sustenance. The male essentially ceases to exist as an independent being, becoming instead a perpetual reproductive organ, his entire evolutionary purpose reduced to the provision of genetic material for the continuation of the species. This parasitic sexual dimorphism is so extreme that scientists initially believed males and females were entirely different species, a misunderstanding that persisted for decades. The psychological unease this inspires in human observers stems from how completely it violates our intuitive understanding of individuality and autonomy. Yet this system has successfully sustained itself for millions of years in the deep ocean's unforgiving environment. The anglerfish demonstrates that in extreme ecosystems where encounters between potential mates are vanishingly rare, evolution can favor solutions so radical and counterintuitive that they seem almost nightmarish from our perspective. What persists despite our discomfort is the recognition that this arrangement, however grotesque, represents a perfectly viable biological strategy, and the anglerfish continues its ancient dance in the darkness, utterly indifferent to our human sensibilities about independence and equality. In this context, the anglerfish becomes a meditation on adaptation itself, a reminder that survival in hostile environments may demand sacrifices of individuality that seem incomprehensible to creatures blessed with abundance, yet which represent not failure but triumph in the specific calculus of deep-sea existence. In the coldest waters of the Arctic Ocean, where sunlight barely penetrates and temperatures hover just above freezing, exists a creature so ancient and so slow that it challenges our very understanding of what it means to be alive. The Greenland shark, a massive predator that can reach lengths of over 20 feet, glides through the darkness with a metabolism so extraordinarily sluggish that it moves at an average speed of less than 1 mile per hour, making it quite possibly the slowest swimming fish on Earth. What makes this creature truly unsettling, however, is not merely its glacial pace or its massive blind eyes, but rather the profound mystery surrounding its lifespan. Scientists have conducted radiocarbon dating on the eye lenses of deceased Greenland sharks and discovered evidence suggesting that some individuals may have lived for over 400 years, with certain specimens potentially reaching ages of 500 years or even beyond. The implications of this discovery are deeply disturbing when we consider what it means for a creature to persist in consciousness, to hunt and consume prey, and to exist in such an alien environment for centuries upon centuries, far outliving entire civilizations of human beings. The psychological mechanism that makes this so difficult to comprehend is our fundamental inability to relate to such extended existence. We are creatures bound by decades, not centuries, and our brains struggle to grasp the reality of a being that may have been swimming through Arctic waters since before the Industrial Revolution began, since before entire nations rose and fell, since before the very concept of modern science existed. Yet despite our discomfort with this reality, the Greenland shark persists in the deep, thriving in conditions that would kill almost any other vertebrate creature on our planet. Perhaps what unsettles us most is that we have only recently discovered this truth about these ancient sharks, suggesting that the deep ocean still conceals countless mysteries about the creatures that call it home, mysteries that have existed for thousands of years without our knowledge or understanding. And as we continue to study these remarkable animals, we are forced to confront a humbling reality, that for centuries, these ancient sharks have been silently navigating the Arctic depths, witnesses to a world that existed long before humanity ever turned its gaze toward the ocean's darkest corners, and they will likely continue their solitary vigil for centuries more, long after we are gone. In this way, the Greenland shark becomes not merely a biological curiosity, but a profound symbol of time itself, a living embodiment of patience, endurance, and the vast, incomprehensible scales on which nature operates beyond the reach of human experience. In the deepest trenches of the ocean, where sunlight has never penetrated and pressure crushes all but the most specialized forms of life, there exists a creature so ancient and so peculiar that it seems less like a living animal and more like a remnant from a prehistoric epoch that should have long since vanished from existence. The frilled shark, scientifically known as Chlamydoslachus anguineus, inhabits the depths between 200 and 700 meters below the surface, though specimens have been discovered at even greater depths, existing in an environment that remains largely unknown and largely unexplored by human understanding. This creature possesses a body that appears serpentine and eel-like, stretching up to 5 feet in length with a flattened head that contains a mouth capable of opening nearly impossibly wide, revealing 300 teeth arranged in 25 rows, each one designed with a backward-pointing curvature that ensures prey can only move deeper into its throat and never escape. The most striking feature, however, is the frilly tissue that extends along both sides of its body just behind the head, a series of gill-like appendages that form a distinctive collar around its front, giving the creature its common name and an appearance that seems somehow wrong to the human eye, a visual reminder that nature operates under entirely different rules in the abyss than it does in the familiar world above. What makes the frilled shark particularly disturbing from a psychological perspective is not merely its unusual appearance, but rather what its existence represents about the fundamental nature of our planet and our place within it. This creature is what scientists refer to as a living fossil, a species that has remained virtually unchanged for millions of years, suggesting that it has found a perfect niche within the deep sea where the need for evolution has simply ceased to exist. The psychological discomfort arises from contemplating what this means, that there are places on Earth so removed from the surface world, so stable and unchanging, that creatures can persist in their ancient forms indefinitely, indifferent to the countless transformations that have reshaped the rest of the animal kingdom. We live on a planet where most life adapts, changes, and evolves, yet somewhere beneath the waves, time moves differently, and creatures from the past continue their existence in the present as if nothing has changed at all, a living contradiction to our understanding of progress and transformation. The frilled shark persists in our collective consciousness not because we fully understand it or have solved its mysteries, but precisely because it remains so fundamentally alien to our experience that we cannot quite shake the unease it generates. Deep beneath the surface of the world's oceans, where sunlight never penetrates and pressure would crush most living things instantly, there exists a creature that has haunted human imagination for centuries. The kraken, a massive cephalopod of such extraordinary size that it has been blamed for the disappearance of ships, the deaths of entire crews, and catastrophes so violent that witnesses seemed almost unwilling to describe them. The kraken exists not as pure mythology, but rather as a distorted reflection of something genuinely real, for giant squid do inhabit the deepest trenches of our oceans, creatures that can grow to lengths exceeding 40 feet, with eyes the size of dinner plates and tentacles lined with suckers that leave circular scars on the bodies of whales. Throughout history, whalers and sailors have discovered these marks on sperm whales, injuries that could only have been inflicted by something enormous and intelligent. Yet because giant squid live at depths where humans cannot easily venture, their true behavior and maximum potential size remain largely unknown to modern science. The psychological mechanism that sustains the Kraken legend operates on a fundamental human principle: the fear of the unknown, combined with the acknowledgement that we possess incomplete information about our own planet, creates a perfect environment for speculation and embellishment. When a whaling ship returned with stories of inexplicable damage, of tentacles thick as tree trunks, of battles waged in darkness that lasted for hours, these accounts mingled with genuine sightings of dead giant squid washing ashore, their enormous bodies serving as proof that something truly monstrous dwelled below. What persists today is a curious cultural normalization of this mystery, where the Kraken has transformed from a creature of pure terror into something almost romanticized, appearing in entertainment and literature as a symbol of oceanic majesty rather than genuine threat. Despite our advanced technology and deep-sea exploration capabilities, we have still captured only a handful of images of living giant squid in their natural habitat, meaning that the Kraken, in a sense, continues to exist in the space between what we know and what we do not know, a reminder that the vast majority of our oceans remain as foreign to us as another planet. In this way, the Kraken serves as a humbling testament to the limits of human knowledge, a creature that exists simultaneously in reality and imagination, reminding us that even in our age of satellite imagery and submersible technology, the ocean still guards its most profound secrets jealously. And perhaps this uncertainty is precisely what has allowed the legend to survive and evolve across centuries. In the crushing darkness of the abyssal zone, where sunlight has never penetrated and pressure could obliterate most living things, exists a creature so peculiar that scientists themselves struggle to classify it with certainty. The Bigfin Squid, formerly known as Humboldt squid or deep-sea squid depending on the species, represents one of the ocean's most enigmatic discoveries, a being that challenges our understanding of how life adapts to extreme environments. First documented in detail through deep-sea exploration footage around the year 2000, these creatures possess an anatomical arrangement that seems almost nightmarish in its proportions and configuration, with disproportionately enormous fins extending from their bodies like translucent wings, coupled with extraordinarily elongated tentacles that can stretch to lengths exceeding 20 feet or more, creating a silhouette that appears almost alien in nature. The real challenge in understanding the Bigfin squid lies not in its existence, which we have confirmed through multiple encounters, but rather in our fundamental inability to observe its behavior in any meaningful context, since bringing such creatures to the surface causes immediate death due to pressure changes, leaving us with only brief video footage captured during deep-sea expeditions as our primary source of knowledge. Our psychological response to this creature emerges from the intersection of several factors: the sheer strangeness of its morphology, the inaccessibility of its habitat, and the profound limitation of our observational capabilities in the deep ocean environment. The Bigfin squid exists in a realm where human presence is temporary and intrusive, where every encounter feels accidental and incomplete, generating an unsettling sense that we are witnessing something we were never meant to see, something that operates according to rules and instincts we cannot possibly comprehend from our surface-dwelling perspective. What persists most disturbing about this creature is not any confirmed danger or threat, for we know virtually nothing about its feeding habits, social behaviors, or ecological role, but rather the philosophical discomfort of knowing that vast regions of our own planet contain life forms we may never truly understand, creatures that exist in conditions so extreme that our technology can only briefly glimpse them before they vanish back into the eternal night. Reminding us that despite centuries of scientific advancement, the deep ocean remains fundamentally alien and beyond our grasp, a frontier where mystery endures not because of mysticism, but because of the simple, undeniable fact that certain environments remain effectively closed to human comprehension. In the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, somewhere in the depths beyond our reach, there exists a creature that has become perhaps the loneliest being on Earth, a whale whose voice no other whale can hear. Since 1989, when oceanographers first detected its call through underwater hydrophones, this solitary animal has been broadcasting a frequency of 52 Hz into the darkness, a sound that stands apart from every other whale species known to science. Blue whales, the largest creatures ever to exist, communicate at frequencies between 10 and 40 Hz, while fin whales typically vocalize around 20 Hz, and humpback whales produce songs that span a much broader range. This 52 Hz whale exists in an acoustic void, its calls resonating at a pitch and frequency that matches no other cetacean on record, creating a situation so peculiar that researchers and the public alike have become fascinated with its story. The whale travels alone through the oceans, sometimes migrating thousands of miles, and yet it continues to sing its unique song every season, broadcasting into what must feel like an indifferent universe that cannot respond in kind. The mystery deepens when we consider the psychological mechanism at work. This whale may be desperate to communicate with others of its kind, instinctively following migration patterns and breeding grounds, all the while unable to successfully reach any member of its species because its voice simply does not match theirs. It is possible that this creature is the last of a distinct population, or perhaps a hybrid whose genetics produced an aberrant frequency, or even an individual born with some physical abnormality that prevents normal vocalization. Despite having no logical reason to continue singing into the void year after year, decade after decade, the 52 Hz whale persists in its lonely chorus, and we have become so accustomed to its isolation that we have given it a name and a mythology. We have transformed its tragedy into a narrative about the nature of connection and loneliness, projecting our own fears of alienation onto this creature whose inner experience remains forever unknowable to us, swimming through darkness with a voice that echoes unanswered. Yet perhaps this is precisely why the 52 Hz whale has captured our collective imagination so completely. It mirrors our deepest anxieties about being fundamentally misunderstood, of broadcasting our authentic selves into a world that may never truly comprehend our signal, and finding meaning nonetheless in the act of singing. Beneath the Antarctic ice shelf, in waters so cold that the very concept of liquid seems to defy the laws of physics, there exists a phenomenon so alien and terrifying that it reads more like science fiction than observable reality. These formations are called brinicles, and they represent one of the ocean's most nightmarish expressions of temperature and chemistry working in perfect, deadly harmony. A brinicle forms when extremely cold, highly saline water descends from beneath sea ice, creating what scientists describe as a frozen plume, or more evocatively, an icy finger of death that extends downward through the water column. The process begins when salt water near the sea ice surface becomes supercooled, dropping to temperatures far below the normal freezing point of freshwater, and as this exceptionally cold brine sinks because of its increased density, it begins to freeze the relatively warmer water it encounters, leaving behind a hollow tube of ice that can extend hundreds of meters downward into the abyss. What makes brinicles so genuinely terrifying is not merely their existence, but the mechanism of their formation and the devastation they cause in their path. The brinicle creates a gradient of increasingly cold water around itself, essentially forming a moving wall of sub-freezing conditions that flash freezes any organism unfortunate enough to be caught within its descending column or in its immediate vicinity. The psychological horror of brinicles stems from imagining the perspective of a deep-sea creature encountering this phenomenon without warning, unable to escape the expanding cone of lethal cold spreading through its environment, freezing it solid from the outside in as the brinicle descends like a predator of pure temperature. We have documented brinicles through deep-sea exploration and underwater filming, confirming their existence and their deadly effectiveness, yet they remain among the least understood and least discussed of all deep-sea phenomena. Perhaps we normalize the terror of brinicles by keeping them confined to scientific literature and rare documentaries, maintaining a comfortable distance from the reality that such mechanisms of instant death exist in our oceans, operating silently and relentlessly in darkness we rarely acknowledge, turning the very water itself into an instrument of swift and absolute destruction. Yet in the brutal mathematics of the Antarctic ecosystem, brinicles are not aberrations, but essential architects of deep-sea chemistry, their frozen columns serving as conduits that transport nutrient-rich brine to the abyssal plains below, making them simultaneously instruments of death and engines of life in an environment where such paradoxes are the only rule that matters. Deep within the sandy and muddy floors of the ocean, at depths where sunlight becomes nothing more than a distant memory, there exists a creature so perfectly adapted to predation that it has earned its name from one of cinema's most shocking moments of violence. The bobbit worm, scientifically known as Unis aphroditwa, is a marine polychaete worm that can grow to lengths exceeding 10 feet, though specimens have been documented reaching nearly twice that size in the deepest regions of the ocean. This creature spends nearly its entire existence buried within the sediment of the seafloor, with only the anterior portion of its body exposed, waiting with what can only be described as infinite patience for the vibrations of unsuspecting prey to ripple through the water column above. The worm possesses 5 antenna-like structures called cirri that protrude from its burrow, acting as extraordinarily sensitive sensory organs capable of detecting the slightest movements of fish, crustaceans, and other organisms swimming nearby. When prey ventures too close, the bobbit worm executes an attack of stunning speed and violence, shooting forward from its burrow with such explosive force that it can bisect a fish in a single bite, using powerful chitinous jaws that snap together with the force of a bear trap, creating one of the most efficient killing mechanisms in the deep ocean ecosystem. The psychological impact of understanding this creature's existence stems from the fundamental dread of hidden predators lurking beneath seemingly peaceful surfaces, the anxiety that emerges when we contemplate what lurks in the darkness waiting to ambush us, and the way this worm represents nature's commitment to perfect camouflage and patient violence. We have normalized the existence of this terrifying predator by treating it as merely another example of nature's diversity, categorizing it alongside thousands of other deep-sea creatures, and filing it away in our collective consciousness as simply one more organism adapted to an extreme environment. Yet the bobbit worm persists in our nightmares because it embodies something we instinctively fear: the predator that waits, the hunter that remains absolutely still, and the sudden explosive violence that comes without warning from the darkness beneath us. In our own waters, divers have discovered bobbit worms lurking beneath coral reefs and rocky outcrops, transforming familiar diving destinations into landscapes of hidden threat, reminding us that even in places we consider explored and understood, evolution has engineered perfect instruments of death waiting just beyond our field of vision. In the perpetual darkness of the midnight zone, where sunlight has never penetrated and pressure crushes with the weight of mountains, there exists a creature so alien in appearance that early marine biologists struggled to classify it among any known taxonomy, and this creature is the vampire squid, scientifically known as Vampirotuthis infernalis, a name that translates quite literally to vampire squid from hell. The vampire squid inhabits depths between 2,000 and 3,000 feet below the ocean's surface, existing in an environment so hostile and so utterly divorced from our own world that it might as well occupy another planet entirely. And yet what makes this creature particularly unsettling is not merely its appearance, but the profound mystery surrounding its behavior and its apparent defiance of the biological laws that govern nearly every other organism we have studied. The creature possesses a body covered in bioluminescent photophores, small light-producing organs that emit a faint glow in the absolute darkness, and it bears large eyes that seem disproportionately enormous relative to its body size, giving it an expression of perpetual horror or anguish, as though it understands something about its existence that fills it with existential dread. Most disturbingly, the vampire squid possesses a remarkable defensive mechanism wherein it can turn itself inside out, evereting its body like a grotesque umbrella and exposing sharp spines and mucus-covered surfaces to potential predators, a behavior so bizarre that it seems to operate according to principles we do not fully comprehend. The psychological mechanism behind our fascination with this creature stems from the fundamental human need to categorize and understand the natural world. Yet the vampire squid resists such categorization with its contradictory characteristics, existing neither fully as a squid nor as an octopus, feeding neither as a hunter nor as a filter feeder in the conventional sense, instead consuming marine snow and detritus that falls from the surface world above. We have normalized our terror of this creature through its inclusion in popular culture and scientific documentation, rendering it familiar enough to discuss while maintaining its essential strangeness. And perhaps this is precisely why the vampire squid continues to haunt our collective imagination, for it represents the boundary between the known and the unknowable. The place where our categories of understanding break down, and we are forced to confront the possibility that the ocean contains beings operating according to logic entirely foreign to our own comprehension. In the depths of the Indian Ocean, living fossils drift through the darkness as if time itself has forgotten them, creatures that were believed to have vanished from Earth approximately 75 million years ago, yet which continue to exist in the crushing pressures and absolute blackness of the deep. The coelacanth represents one of the most profound revelations in modern scientific history, a fish that embodies the very concept of the impossible made tangible, a species that challenges everything we thought we understood about extinction and the permanence of the evolutionary record. When the first modern specimen was discovered in 1938 off the coast of South Africa, the scientific community experienced a shock comparable to discovering a living dinosaur walking through a contemporary city. For these creatures were known only through fossilized remains, their lineage traced back through hundreds of millions of years of geological time, their closest relatives having supposedly died out in an era when dinosaurs still ruled the terrestrial world. The coelacanth's existence forces us to confront a deeply unsettling realization that our understanding of life's history is fundamentally incomplete, that vast sections of the ocean remain almost entirely unexplored and unknowable to us, and that creatures of impossible antiquity may be swimming in the depths even now, hidden from human knowledge by the sheer vastness and hostility of the deep sea environment. What makes the coelacanth psychologically unnerving is precisely how it violates our expectations about how the world works, how it demonstrates that extinction, which we treat as permanent and irreversible, may be less absolute than we assume, and how it reveals the catastrophic limitations of our knowledge regarding what truly exists on this planet. We have normalized this impossibility by incorporating the coelacanth into our museums and scientific classifications, by studying it and explaining its biology in rational terms, yet this act of normalization cannot fully dispel the fundamental strangeness of its existence, the profound mystery of how populations have survived unchanged for millions of years in an environment we barely comprehend, persisting in the darkness as if the world above has never truly known they were there. The coelacanth reminds us that the deep ocean remains less explored than the surface of the moon, and that each expedition into those abyssal zones may yet reveal organisms that rewrite the textbooks we have so carefully constructed, creatures waiting in the cold darkness with their own evolutionary stories still unfolding beyond the reach of human understanding. Deep within the darkness of the ocean, far from any coastline or human settlement, sailors throughout history have reported witnessing a phenomenon so extraordinary and so utterly alien that it defies conventional explanation. They call it the Milky Sea, a vast expanse of water that glows with an ethereal, luminescent quality, transforming the entire ocean's surface into something resembling a cosmic landscape of milk and starlight. These accounts stretch back centuries, documented in maritime logs and crew testimonies from vessels traveling through the Indian Ocean and other deep water regions, where sailors watched in awe and terror as the sea around them began to emanate a soft, pervasive glow that seemed to come from within the water itself rather than from any external source. The phenomenon can extend across hundreds of square kilometers, turning the darkness of night into an otherworldly tableau where the boundary between water and sky becomes almost imperceptible, where a sailor might look down into the luminous depths and then look up at the stars above and feel utterly uncertain about which direction they were actually gazing. The scientific explanation, though proposed only in recent decades, points to bioluminescent bacteria, vast colonies of dinoflagellates or other microorganisms that possess the ability to produce light through chemical reactions within their own bodies. When conditions align perfectly, when nutrient levels spike and water temperatures stabilize, and countless billions of these organisms reach critical population density simultaneously, they create a coordinated display of light that overwhelms the senses and transforms the ocean into something that seems to belong to another world entirely. The bacteria emit light as a byproduct of their metabolism, a defense mechanism perhaps, or a method of communication within their microscopic communities. Yet when aggregated across such massive scales, the collective effect becomes a phenomenon that can be observed from ships and, in some historical accounts, even from considerable distances away. What remains deeply unsettling, however, is how many of these accounts predate any scientific understanding of bioluminescence, how mariners could describe the phenomenon with such precision and consistency without possessing the vocabulary of microbiology or chemistry, and how the Milky Sea continues to appear sporadically in remote ocean regions where documentation remains sparse and verification nearly impossible. For centuries, sailors returning from distant voyages have reported encounters with enormous serpentine creatures undulating through the ocean depths. Creatures so massive and so fundamentally unlike anything catalogued by modern science that their accounts have been simultaneously recorded in ship logs and dismissed as the delusions of men driven mad by months at sea. These reports span continents and centuries, from the Norwegian waters of the 18th century to the coasts of New England, from the Indian Ocean to remote Pacific islands, describing creatures with heads like horses or camels, bodies that stretch for dozens of meters, long fins or hair flowing in the current, and movements that defy explanation when attributed to known marine animals. The consistency of these reports across cultures, time periods, and geographic locations creates a curious psychological weight, a sense that something so universally described might warrant serious consideration. Yet when scientists examine the physical evidence we have, the remains that wash ashore, the photographs that emerge, they reveal something far more mundane. The decomposing bodies of basking sharks with cartilage columns that can stretch and contort grotesquely, or fish that actually do grow to extraordinary lengths, but whose silvery, ribbon-like forms bear little resemblance to the powerful serpents described in eyewitness accounts. And occasionally, the wishful misidentification of floating logs, kelp forests, or waves reflecting unusual light. The mechanism underlying sea serpent sightings rests partly in the genuine strangeness of deep-sea creatures, animals so unlike terrestrial life that they seem almost supernatural when glimpsed in poor lighting or from a distance, combined with the human mind's powerful tendency to impose familiar patterns upon unfamiliar stimuli, to see ahead where there might be merely a bulbous section of a creature's body. To interpret undulating movement as purposeful serpentine progression when it might be the simple bobbing of currents. Yet despite our understanding of these mechanisms, despite the documented explanations provided by marine biology and oceanography, the legend persists not as a literal belief among most educated people, but as a cultural touchstone, a persistent whisper in our collective imagination suggesting that the ocean remains incompletely explored, that somewhere in the vast dark below the surface, creatures of impossible size and unknowable nature might still glide through pressurized depths untouched by human knowledge. We have normalized the sea serpent as mythology while simultaneously harboring the unspoken concern that the ocean's profound vastness might eventually prove us wrong. Beneath the surface of the western Pacific Ocean lies a place so remote, so impossibly deep, that fewer human beings have stood upon its floor than have walked upon the surface of the moon, and this location is known as the Challenger Deep, a submarine trench located within the Mariana Trench system at a depth of approximately 36,000 feet below the ocean's surface, where the pressure is so immense that it would instantaneously crush most forms of life, compressing a human body to the size of a fist within mere seconds if exposed to these conditions unprotected. The Challenger Deep represents the deepest known point in Earth's oceans, a place of absolute darkness where sunlight has never penetrated and where temperatures hover just above freezing, creating an environment so alien and inhospitable that it seems almost unimaginable that anything could exist there at all. Yet life finds a way in these crushing depths, with strange creatures adapted through millions of years of evolution to tolerate conditions that would obliterate nearly everything else on this planet. What makes the Challenger Deep particularly terrifying from a psychological perspective is the simple fact that it exists at all, that Earth contains places so fundamentally hostile to human existence that our most advanced technology and engineering can barely withstand the journey there. And when we consider the vastness of the ocean and the countless unmapped trenches and abysses that likely exist in similarly extreme locations, we are forced to confront the reality that we inhabit a world containing regions that remain essentially hostile to our comprehension and exploration. The mechanism behind our fascination with the Challenger Deep involves the human need to understand and categorize our environment, to map it completely, and yet we find ourselves unable to do so because the depths present challenges that fundamentally resist easy solution, creating a peculiar cognitive dissonance where we recognize that the ocean floor exists and should theoretically be knowable, yet the conditions make such knowledge extraordinarily difficult to obtain and verify. In the abyssal depths of the Atlantic Ocean, where sunlight has never penetrated and pressure crushes with the force of mountains, there exists a creature of such singular and horrifying design that it seems almost impossible such a thing could evolve. The black swallower, scientifically known as Chiasmata niger, is a deep-sea fish of unremarkable appearance until the moment it encounters prey, at which point it becomes something far more disturbing than its modest size would suggest. This small fish, typically measuring around 6 inches in length, possesses an extraordinarily elastic stomach and an ability to consume prey items substantially larger than itself, sometimes swallowing fish nearly twice its own body length and 3 times its body mass. The mechanism by which this occurs is anatomically bizarre, as the black swallower's jaw unhinged to impossible angles, and its stomach expands with such remarkable flexibility that it can accommodate meals that would seem incompatible with its frame. What makes this creature particularly fascinating from a psychological standpoint is not merely its capacity for consumption, but rather the consequences of its own appetite, for the black swallower frequently dies from the very act of feeding, as its prey decomposes inside its distended stomach, releasing gases that inflate the fish's body cavity until it becomes neutrally buoyant or even positively buoyant, causing it to rise helplessly toward the surface where the pressure changes prove fatal. This creates a grotesque irony wherein the creature's greatest adaptation becomes its inevitable doom, yet the black swallower persists in this behavior regardless, driven by evolutionary imperatives that have never adapted to the reality of a deep-sea environment where meals are rare and precious. The disturbing nature of this creature's existence lies not in any supernatural quality, but rather in the fundamental disconnect between its predatory instinct and the actual consequences of that instinct, a disconnect so profound that it routinely ensures its own death through the very mechanism that allows it to survive. We have normalized this tragic paradox by cataloging it, by filing it away in our databases and textbooks as merely another curiosity of deep-sea adaptation, another puzzle piece in the grand evolutionary picture, yet the essential horror remains unchanged. A creature locked in an eternal loop of eating itself to death over and over in the silent darkness where no one can hear its struggle. And yet, when specimens have washed ashore or been dredged from the depths, their stomachs have revealed the remains of fish far too large to have been swallowed by any creature of such diminutive proportions, a grotesque testament to hunger's willingness to override all biological wisdom. In the year 1976, off the coast of Hawaii, a fishing vessel accidentally snagged something extraordinary in its anchor cables, something that would fundamentally challenge our understanding of what could exist in the deep ocean without our knowledge. The creature they hauled to the surface was a shark unlike any documented species, a massive filter-feeding behemoth that measured over 14 feet in length and possessed a mouth so enormous and peculiar that it seemed almost disproportionate to the rest of its body, a gaping maw that could expand to extraordinary proportions to consume vast quantities of small fish and plankton. This was the Megamouth Shark, and despite living in our own oceans, it had managed to remain entirely unknown to science until that moment, suggesting that the deep sea harbors secrets we have barely begun to comprehend. The psychological impact of this discovery resonates deeply because it exposes a fundamental gap in our knowledge, a revelation that suggests entire species of significant size could thrive in the depths completely invisible to human observation and study, dwelling in the darkness where we have sent so few expeditions and gathered so little data. We have mapped the surface of Mars with greater precision than we have mapped the ocean floor, yet we tell ourselves that we understand our planet, that we know what lives in our own waters, and that such discoveries are rare anomalies rather than indications of vast undiscovered territories. Since that initial encounter in 1976, fewer than 100 specimens of megamouth sharks have been documented, with each new sighting generating scientific excitement precisely because these animals remain profoundly mysterious and poorly understood despite decades of study. The megamouth shark persists in our collective consciousness not because it poses an immediate threat to humanity, but because it symbolizes the haunting reality that we share this world with creatures we do not know, creatures that navigate our oceans with complete indifference to our presence, and creatures that may have existed for millions of years in the depths while we remained oblivious to their existence. This normalization of ignorance, this acceptance that vast portions of our ocean remain practically alien to us, represents a peculiar form of cognitive dissonance that allows us to continue living our lives as if we truly understand the world we inhabit. Yet the megamouth shark stands as a humbling reminder that every time we descend into the abyss, we risk encountering the impossible, a creature that forces us to confront the arrogance of assuming we have already discovered all the wonders that our planet has to offer. In 1964, the research vessel Eltanin was conducting deep-sea surveys in the Southern Ocean near Antarctica, systematically collecting data about the ocean floor and its mysterious inhabitants, when its cameras captured something entirely inexplicable at a depth of approximately 14,000 feet, an image so profoundly strange that it would become one of the most discussed and debated pieces of deep-sea footage ever recorded. The photograph showed what appeared to be a delicate, geometric structure rising from the seafloor, resembling nothing so much as an antenna or perhaps some kind of deliberately constructed apparatus, with a main stem and what looked like deliberately arranged crosspieces at regular intervals, standing isolated and utterly purposeful against the featureless abyssal plain. The structure was relatively small, perhaps a meter or two in height, but it possessed such an air of intentionality, such obvious geometric regularity, that it immediately sparked intense speculation among scientists, conspiracy theorists, and the general public alike, with some suggesting it was an extraterrestrial monitoring device, others proposing it was evidence of an advanced underwater civilization, and still others entertaining the possibility that we had somehow discovered evidence of time travelers or interdimensional visitors. What makes the Eltanin Antenna psychologically compelling is that it occupies a space of perfect ambiguity, existing at the precise intersection between the explainable and the utterly mysterious, because the ocean depths remain among the least explored regions of our entire planet, with more than 80% of the deep sea completely unmapped and unsurveyed, meaning that genuinely extraordinary discoveries occur with some regularity. When confronted with an unusual object in a setting so fundamentally alien and unknowable, the human mind naturally gravitates toward the most dramatic possible interpretations, filling the void of actual knowledge with increasingly elaborate theories, each more compelling than the last, each more reassuring in its explanatory totality than the simple admission of profound uncertainty. Over decades, more mundane explanations have been offered, with marine biologists and oceanographers suggesting that the structure could be a type of sponge, possibly a sea lily or some other sessile organism that might appear more geometric and constructed than it actually is. Yet these rational explanations have never quite achieved complete satisfaction, never quite fully extinguished the lingering sense that something remains fundamentally unresolved about the image itself. In the depths of the Antarctic Ocean, where darkness reigns absolute and pressure crushes all conventional life into unrecognizable forms, there exists a creature that has haunted the collective imagination of internet communities and cryptozoology enthusiasts since the early 2000s, a being known only by its Japanese name, the Ninjin, which simply means human. The creature was first documented through grainy photographs and eyewitness accounts allegedly captured by Japanese whaling vessel crews operating in Antarctic waters. Descriptions that painted a picture of something impossibly large, measuring somewhere between 60 and 100 feet in length, with a distinctly humanoid upper body complete with arms and hands, yet with a lower body that transitions into something aquatic, something fundamentally other. The photographs that circulated through early internet forums showed what appeared to be an enormous white or pale form suspended in the deep. Though the image quality remained perpetually unclear, perpetually ambiguous, never quite sharp enough to definitively confirm or deny the creature's existence. What makes the Ninjin phenomenon particularly fascinating is not necessarily the creature itself, but rather the psychological mechanism through which a grainy photograph in second hand accounts transformed into widespread belief and cultural fascination. How the human mind fills in the gaps of visual ambiguity with meaning and intention, projecting familiar forms onto the unknown and uncertain landscape of the deep ocean. The anonymity of internet forums provided a perfect breeding ground for such legends, where unverified claims could circulate freely, where each retelling added new details and embellishments, where the lack of scientific scrutiny became almost a feature rather than a limitation, allowing believers to construct increasingly elaborate explanations for why mainstream marine biology had failed to acknowledge these creatures. Yet despite the complete absence of skeletal remains, tissue samples, verified photographic evidence, or any physical proof whatsoever, the Ninjin persists in popular culture and cryptozoological discussion, a testament to humanity's enduring fascination with the idea that vast unknown territories still harbor undiscovered wonders, that the deep ocean remains fundamentally unknowable, that somewhere beyond the reach of conventional science, mysteries await. The normalization of the Ninjin in paranormal circles reveals something profound about how we process uncertainty and maintain wonder in an increasingly documented world, how the absence of evidence can paradoxically strengthen belief rather than diminish it. In the absolute darkness of the midnight zone, where sunlight has never penetrated and pressure would crush most creatures instantly, There exists a fish so bizarre in its construction that it seems almost impossible that evolution could produce something so deliberately nightmarish. And this creature is known as the Gulper Eel, a predator whose very existence challenges our understanding of what a functional body plan should be. The Gulper Eel possesses a mouth that appears comically oversized relative to its body, a gaping maw that can unhinge and expand to nearly the size of its entire frame, lined with teeth that point inward to trap prey that it swallows whole, a mouth so enormous that it seems to serve no practical purpose in an environment where food is so scarce that finding meals requires extraordinary effort and desperate measures. What makes this creature particularly unsettling is not merely its appearance, but the complete absence of any logic to its design. For in an ecosystem where energy conservation is paramount, the Gulper Eel expends tremendous effort to develop and maintain this grotesque adaptation, a mouth that is useful perhaps once every several days when it encounters prey in the vast emptiness, yet it carries this burden constantly through the water. The psychological mechanism behind our fascination with such creatures stems from the fundamental human need to categorize and understand nature through the lens of efficiency and proportion. And when we encounter something that violates these principles so egregiously, something that seems to defy the elegant logic we believe governs evolution, we experience a kind of cognitive dissonance that registers as fear and unease. Yet what persists despite our logical understanding that the Gulper Eel is simply another fish adapted to its specific niche is a deeper discomfort, a recognition that there exists an entire realm below us populated by organisms whose forms suggest purposeful malevolence rather than neutral adaptation, creatures that wear their predatory nature not as a necessity but as an advertisement, and we have somehow normalized this through scientific classification and documentation, transforming the genuinely alien into the merely unusual through the simple act of naming it and placing it within our taxonomic systems. In the year 2011, a Swedish diving team called Ocean X Team was conducting a routine sonar survey of the Baltic Sea, searching for a World War II-era shipwreck, when their equipment detected something profoundly unusual on the seafloor approximately 87 meters beneath the surface, located in the deep waters between Sweden and Finland. What they discovered was a massive circular formation rising from the sandy bottom, measuring roughly 60 meters in diameter, with what appeared to be steep sides and a flat top, resembling nothing so much as an enormous disk or perhaps the ruins of some vast artificial structure. The sonar imagery showed additional anomalies, including what looked like a trail or pathway leading away from the main formation and scattered debris scattered across the surrounding area. When the team released their initial findings to the public, the images sparked intense speculation and fascination, with countless theories emerging almost immediately, ranging from the plausible to the wildly speculative. Some suggested it was merely an unusual geological formation created by volcanic activity or glacial movements during the last ice age, while others proposed it might be an undiscovered species creation, or perhaps even something far more extraordinary and alien in origin. The team conducted follow-up dives and investigations, collecting samples and taking photographs, yet the true nature of the formation remained stubbornly unclear and difficult to explain with certainty. Despite numerous scientific analyses suggesting perfectly ordinary explanations rooted in geological processes and natural phenomena, the Baltic Sea Anomaly has persisted in public consciousness as a genuine mystery, a symbol of the vast unknown territories that remain largely unexplored beneath our oceans. The persistence of this mystery is curious because rational explanations exist and have been proposed by legitimate researchers. Yet the public imagination continues to treat it as genuinely anomalous, suggesting our deep need to believe that genuinely inexplicable things still exist in our world, that exploration can still yield discoveries that challenge our understanding, and that mysteries of genuine significance remain hidden in the darkness below the waves, waiting patiently to be discovered by those brave enough to venture into the deep. Perhaps it is this very tension between scientific explanation and human wonder that ensures the Baltic Sea Anomaly will endure as a cultural touchstone, a reminder that the boundary between the known and unknown remains far more permeable than we might wish to believe, and that some mysteries, even when solved, retain their power to captivate our imagination and inspire our continued curiosity about the world around us. In the perpetual darkness of the deep ocean, approximately 3,000 to 4,000 feet below the surface where sunlight has surrendered entirely to an impenetrable black, there exists a creature so perfectly adapted to its hostile environment that it seems less like a product of evolution and more like a deliberate nightmare engineered by nature itself. The viperfish, a small predator no more than 12 inches in length, possesses a mouth that can unhinge to extraordinary proportions, revealing teeth so large and disproportionate that they cannot fit within its closed jaws even when the mouth is completely shut, forcing the creature to swim with its fangs perpetually exposed like a grotesque permanent grin. These teeth, needle-sharp and positioned at angles that seem designed only for inflicting maximum damage, serve a singular purpose in an environment where food is scarce enough that predators cannot afford to miss any opportunity, however infinitesimal. The viperfish's eyes are positioned upward on its head, allowing it to spot the faintest bioluminescent signals of potential prey illuminated against the infinitesimal light filtering down from the distant surface. And its entire body design reflects an organism shaped purely by the merciless demands of survival in a realm where energy conservation is paramount and every calorie consumed must exceed the caloric expenditure required to obtain it. What makes the viperfish particularly unsettling is not merely its grotesque appearance, but the psychological dissonance it creates when we recognize that this creature's terrifying features are not accidents or evolutionary mistakes, but rather perfect solutions to problems we cannot fully comprehend. The deep sea itself is fundamentally hostile to human understanding, a pressure-crushed realm where our instruments fail and our intuitions about life prove systematically wrong. Yet we find ourselves unable to stop projecting our own moral frameworks onto creatures that operate under entirely different rules of existence. The viperfish persists in the depths not despite its horrifying anatomy but because of it, and yet we continue to feel disturbed by its appearance, struggling to reconcile our understanding that all things in nature serve a purpose with our visceral revulsion at encountering something so perfectly and completely alien to human sensibility. Perhaps this unease reveals something profound about ourselves, that we are creatures of light who cannot help but fear what dwells in absolute darkness, and that our revulsion toward the viperfish is ultimately a confrontation with the limits of our own comprehension, a humbling reminder that the natural world contains mysteries that will always exceed our capacity to fully rationalize or accept. Deep beneath the surface of the ocean, in zones where sunlight has never penetrated, and where life should theoretically cease to exist, scientists have discovered something that fundamentally challenges our understanding of how oxygen enters our world's ecosystems. This phenomenon is known as dark oxygen, and it represents one of the most perplexing mysteries currently unfolding in marine biology. In the abyssal plains and in the sediments of the deep ocean floor, researchers have detected the production of oxygen in complete and total darkness, in environments where photosynthesis cannot possibly occur because there is simply no light for organisms to harness. The discovery emerged from meticulously calibrated instruments that measure dissolved oxygen concentrations in deep-sea sediments, instruments so sensitive that they can detect minute chemical changes in these remote and hostile environments. When scientists analyzed their data, they found that oxygen was being produced through mechanisms that had previously gone entirely unrecognized, oxygen that was not drifting down from the surface waters where phytoplankton and algae perform their daily work of photosynthesis. The source of this dark oxygen remains incompletely understood, though researchers have proposed several fascinating mechanisms. One leading theory suggests that manganese oxides in deep-sea sediments may be chemically reacting with organic matter in ways that release molecular oxygen as a byproduct, a purely chemical process that requires no living organism to function. Another possibility involves unusual metabolic pathways in specialized bacteria and archaea that can generate oxygen through unconventional biochemical reactions, processes so alien to conventional microbiology that they challenge textbooks written across generations. What makes this discovery particularly unsettling is not merely the oxygen itself, but what its existence implies about how much we actually do not know about the deep ocean's fundamental processes. For decades, marine scientists constructed elaborate models of how energy flows through the ocean, how ecosystems persist in the crushing darkness, and where oxygen originates in those lightless depths. Dark oxygen introduces a wild variable into all those carefully constructed equations, a source of energy and chemical production that exists entirely outside the frameworks we had built to understand the abyss. The phenomenon persists in scientific literature as something genuinely mysterious because despite months of intensive research and sophisticated measurement campaigns, the precise mechanisms remain elusive and resistant to simple explanation. For centuries, the giant squid existed primarily as legend and myth, a creature whispered about by sailors who claimed to have glimpsed enormous tentacles rising from the abyss, creatures so vast and powerful that they could drag entire ships down into the darkness below. Yet for the longest time, scientists possessed no concrete evidence that these animals actually existed at all, treating accounts of them as the exaggerated tales of drunk mariners desperate for attention and recognition. The giant squid, Architeuthis dux, inhabits the deepest regions of the ocean where sunlight never penetrates, where pressures would crush most surface-dwelling creatures instantly, and where food is so scarce that survival itself becomes an exercise in patience and predatory efficiency that we can barely comprehend. We know these creatures can grow to lengths exceeding 40 feet, their massive eyes, the size of dinner plates, designed to capture every photon of bioluminescent light in the perpetual darkness, and their tentacles lined with suction cups equipped with tooth-like rings that can grip and tear at flesh with terrifying precision. Psychological mechanism that makes the giant squid so captivating to our minds stems from the fundamental human fear of the unknown combined with the terror of scale and power beyond our control. For we live in a world where we have mapped and cataloged most large animals. Yet here exists a creature that dwells in an alien realm so hostile and distant that we understand virtually nothing about its behavior, its social structures, or its true capabilities in its natural environment. The ocean depths represent the final frontier of terrestrial exploration, and the giant squid serves as the perfect embodiment of everything we cannot see, cannot reach, and cannot dominate, a reminder that despite our technological advancement and scientific knowledge, vast portions of our own planet remain genuinely mysterious and beyond our grasp. What persists despite our lack of understanding is a kind of resigned acceptance that the giant squid simply is, that it continues its existence in the deep in ways we may never fully comprehend, and that perhaps it is appropriate that some creatures remain enigmatic and undocumented, existing in the spaces between what we know and what we fear might be true. The few specimens we have recovered, either washed ashore or found in the stomachs of sperm whales, have provided tantalizingly incomplete glimpses into their lives, fragments of a story we may never fully read, and perhaps that incompleteness is precisely what allows the giant squid to retain its power over our imagination, to continue inspiring wonder in an age where mystery itself has become increasingly rare. Nestled in the western Pacific Ocean, roughly 200 kilometers south of Tokyo, lies a region known as the Devil's Sea, or as the Japanese call it, the Mono-Yumi, a place that has captured the imagination of maritime folklore enthusiasts and paranormal researchers for decades, though the reality of what occurs there is far more subtle and scientifically explicable than popular culture would have us believe. Throughout the 20th century, numerous ships and aircraft were reported to have vanished without trace in this particular expanse of water, with claims ranging from sudden disappearances to vessels found abandoned and completely intact, their crews simply gone, leaving behind only mystery and unanswered questions about what forces could possibly orchestrate such vanishings. The region became synonymous with the Bermuda Triangle in Western consciousness, a mirror image of maritime strangeness on the opposite side of the world, capturing imaginations with tales of supernatural phenomena, magnetic anomalies, and otherworldly forces that seem to defy rational explanation. However, when we examine the documented cases with genuine scrutiny, a far more mundane pattern emerges from beneath the sensationalism. Many of the reported disappearances either never actually occurred or were substantially misrepresented by early accounts, exaggerated through retelling until fact became indistinguishable from legend, a process that speaks more to human nature than to any genuine environmental hazard. What the Devil's Sea actually possesses, though perhaps less cinematically interesting than phantom ships and vanishing crews, are entirely legitimate geological and meteorological phenomena that can indeed pose genuine dangers to maritime traffic. The region sits atop a complex network of underwater volcanic formations and methane hydrate deposits, vast frozen reserves of methane gas trapped beneath the ocean floor that can destabilize and release suddenly, causing the water's density to decrease dramatically and potentially causing ships to lose buoyancy and sink rapidly, a phenomenon that has been replicated in laboratory conditions and documented in scientific literature. Additionally, the area experiences unpredictable weather patterns, powerful currents, and typhoons that can develop with startling rapidity, conditions that were genuinely dangerous for older vessels lacking modern navigation and communication technology. Yet despite the existence of these logical, scientifically understood explanations, the legend of the Devil's Sea persists in popular consciousness with remarkable resilience, continuing to generate speculation and documentary interest even as actual maritime incidents in the region have become increasingly rare thanks to modern technology and improved safety protocols. Deep beneath the surface of the ocean, at depths where sunlight cannot penetrate and pressure becomes almost incomprehensible, there exist pockets of liquid so dense and salty that they form distinct layers within the water itself, creating what scientists call brine pools, and these mysterious formations represent some of the most alien environments on our entire planet. These accumulations of hypersaline water occur primarily in the deepest parts of the ocean floor, particularly in basins where ancient salt deposits have dissolved or where mineral-rich hydrothermal vents continuously feed saltwater into concentrated reservoirs. And the density of this brine is so extreme that it remains separate from the regular seawater above it, forming a distinct interface that appears almost like an underwater lake suspended in the depths. What makes brine pools truly unsettling is not merely their chemical composition, but rather the way they affect the creatures that inadvertently venture into them, as organisms that swim into these pools find themselves unable to escape, their bodies becoming heavier than the denser brine below, causing them to sink and become preserved in a grotesque state within the hypersaline environment. The psychological mechanism underlying our fascination with brine pools stems from their representation of a boundary between habitable and uninhabitable space, a distinct threshold in an environment that already feels fundamentally alien and hostile to human existence, and we are drawn to the idea that within the same ocean where life persists, there exist pockets of such extreme conditions that they become death traps, places where the normal rules of marine survival cease to apply. Yet despite our scientific understanding of how brine pools form and function, we continue to describe them using language typically reserved for horror and mystery, referring to them as underwater graveyards and lakes of death, when in reality they are simply regions where salt concentration creates different density conditions, and this persistent tendency to anthropomorphize these geological formations, to imbue them with intent and malevolence, reveals how deeply our minds resist accepting that danger in nature is often merely accidental consequence rather than purposeful threat. Perhaps this tendency to mythologize brine pools also reflects our broader discomfort with environments that operate according to principles fundamentally different from those that sustain human life, environments where our intuitions about survival and danger become unreliable guides, and where the ocean reveals itself not as a unified realm but as a collection of distinct worlds, each with its own rules and boundaries. Descending into the bathypelagic zone, approximately 2,000 meters beneath the surface of the ocean, exists a creature that seems to defy the very principles of evolutionary design, a fish known as the fangtooth or Anaplogaster cornuta, whose appearance is so grotesque and unsettling that early marine biologists initially believed the preserved specimens they encountered were distorted or malformed rather than genuine representations of a living species. The fangtooth is characterized by a head that appears disproportionately large relative to its body, which rarely exceeds 6 inches in length, and most disturbingly, by teeth so oversized and protruding that they cannot fit within its mouth, extending outward in all directions like daggers arranged in some chaotic architectural nightmare, creating a visage that seems purposefully designed to inspire revulsion and dread in any observer. What makes the fangtooth particularly fascinating from a biological perspective is that despite its nightmarish appearance, it is an entirely passive and harmless creature, subsisting on small fish and crustaceans that it encounters in the absolute darkness of the deep ocean, where vision and appearance matter far less than the specialized sensory systems that guide its existence through perpetual midnight. The psychological mechanism that drives our horror at the fangtooth's appearance stems from a fundamental mismatch between expectation and reality. The creature's demonic visage seems purposefully constructed for aggression and dominance, yet its actual behavior suggests vulnerability and adaptation to an environment where conventional standards of beauty and functionality have been completely abandoned in favor of mere survival. We have normalized the existence of the fangtooth by cataloging it, studying it, and placing it within our scientific frameworks, Yet the cognitive dissonance it produces persists despite our intellectual understanding that evolution operates according to environmental pressures rather than aesthetic principles. And perhaps what truly unsettles us is the reminder that in the deepest reaches of our planet, biology follows rules entirely alien to our terrestrial sensibilities. The fangtooth serves as a humbling reminder that the natural world contains multitudes of existence beyond our capacity to aesthetically comprehend, and that survival in Earth's most extreme environments often requires abandoning the morphological conventions that govern creatures dwelling in sunlight and relative abundance, suggesting that our horror is ultimately a failure of imagination rather than a defect in the creature itself. Off the coast of Yonaguni, the southernmost inhabited island of Japan, there exists a massive underwater structure that descends approximately 80 meters below the surface of the Pacific Ocean. And this formation consists of several distinct rock terraces and platforms that form what appears to be a deliberately constructed stepped pyramid or ziggurat, complete with what researchers describe as flat surfaces, right angles, and geometric precision that seem far too intentional to be products of natural geological processes alone. The monument spans roughly 200 meters in length and displays multiple levels that ascend in what many observers interpret as an architectural design, with some sections featuring what appear to be staircases, platforms large enough to hold hundreds of people, and stone blocks arranged in ways that defy conventional explanations for underwater stone formations. Yet the structure remains largely unstudied and poorly understood by mainstream archaeological and geological communities despite its discovery in the early 1990s. The psychological mechanism that keeps this mystery alive operates through our fundamental human need to recognize patterns and intention in the world around us, combined with our innate tendency to interpret ambiguous evidence through the lens of lost civilizations and forgotten human achievement, which proves particularly compelling when we encounter structures that possess geometric qualities we associate with human engineering rather than random natural processes. However, the structure also represents what oceanographers call pareidolia on a massive scale, where our brains impose meaningful shapes onto naturally fractured and layered rock formations that have been shaped by millions of years of tectonic activity, erosion, and underwater geological processes that we do not fully comprehend. And yet we remain unable to dismiss the site entirely because we lack definitive proof of either complete human construction or entirely natural formation. What makes the Yonaguni Monument persist as a mystery despite reasonable geological explanations is our collective difficulty in accepting that natural forces can create formations that appear intentional, that we have normalized our skepticism of the mainstream dismissal while simultaneously remaining unconvinced by alternative theories, and that the monument sits in a peculiar space where it is neither proven ancient human architecture nor fully explained natural formation, leaving it suspended in perpetual ambiguity in the depths below. This ambiguity mirrors our broader relationship with the ocean itself, a realm where human knowledge remains limited and where the boundary between discovery and interpretation becomes increasingly difficult to discern. In the depths of the ocean, at depths ranging from 100 to 3,000 meters below the surface, there exists a creature so peculiar and so methodical in its hunting behavior that it has earned a reputation as one of the deep sea's most enigmatic predators, and this creature is the Cookiecutter Shark. A small fish that measures only around 20 inches in length, yet possesses a hunting strategy so specialized and so efficient that it has become the subject of extensive scientific study and considerable mystery. The Cookiecutter Shark is not a scavenger in the traditional sense, nor is it a hunter that pursues large prey with aggressive tactics, but rather it is a creature that practices a form of parasitic predation that is almost unparalleled in the natural world, approaching much larger marine animals including whales, dolphins, tuna, and even submarines, using its specially adapted mouth to remove perfectly circular plugs of flesh and blubber from the bodies of these much larger creatures. The mechanism behind this behavior lies in the shark's extraordinary mouth structure, featuring razor-sharp teeth arranged in a circular pattern that allows it to clamp onto its victim's body with tremendous force, rotating its entire body like a corkscrew while maintaining its grip, thereby excavating a cylindrical core of tissue that leaves behind a distinctive circular wound that resembles, quite fittingly, a bite taken from a cookie. What makes this behavior particularly fascinating from a scientific perspective is that the Cookiecutter shark appears to target living animals deliberately rather than scavenging from corpses, suggesting a level of predatory intelligence and selective feeding, behavior that most deep-sea creatures do not exhibit. And the shark can consume multiple plugs of flesh from the same victim, apparently processing the rich, nutrient-dense blubber with remarkable efficiency. The persistence of this behavior, despite the seemingly improbable logistics of such a specialized feeding strategy, reflects a broader truth about deep-sea evolution, wherein creatures develop increasingly specialized adaptations to exploit particular ecological niches, because competition and resources in these extreme environments are distributed in such a way that extreme specialization actually increases survival rates. And the Cookiecutter shark's approach has proven so successful that the species has remained relatively unchanged for millions of years, suggesting that its unique hunting method represents an evolutionary solution that functions perfectly within the constraints of its particular ecosystem. In February of 1948, maritime radio operators across the Indian Ocean picked up a distress signal from a merchant vessel named the Ourang Medan, a Dutch-registered cargo ship that was traveling through the Strait of Malacca between Malaysia and Sumatra when something catastrophic occurred within its hull. The operators who received the transmission described it as unusually clear and articulate, yet deeply disturbing, as a voice on the other end spoke in English with deliberate precision, repeating the chilling phrase, "All officers including captain are dead, lying in chartroom and bridge, all crew and forecastle dead," before the final haunting message came through stating simply, "I die," before the radio went silent forever. What made this incident particularly strange was that despite multiple ships in the vicinity attempting to locate and assist the vessel, when rescuers finally reached the coordinates where the Ourang Medan should have been, they discovered the ship completely intact and seemingly undamaged, yet entirely devoid of human life, with corpses arranged in peculiar positions throughout the vessel, some with expressions of absolute terror frozen upon their faces. And when salvage crews attempted to board the ship to investigate further, it suddenly sank beneath the waves before any meaningful examination could take place. The psychological mechanism that has kept this mystery alive for decades rests upon the fundamental human need to explain the inexplicable, to find patterns in randomness, and to construct narratives around genuine gaps in our historical record. For the Ourang Medan represents a perfect storm of maritime mystery elements: a ghost ship, mysterious deaths, eerie final communications, and a wreck that vanished before science could properly examine it. The mystery persists despite extensive research suggesting that the incident may have been entirely fictional, perhaps a hoax transmitted as a maritime prank or journalistic exaggeration that gained traction through repeated retellings. Yet even with this rational explanation available to us, the story continues to circulate through maritime folklore and popular culture with undiminished potency, suggesting that our need for genuine unsolved mysteries remains so compelling that we are willing to maintain them even when evidence points toward more mundane explanations. And the Ourang Medan endures as a perfect example of how maritime history creates its own legends regardless of verifiable truth. This pattern of preferring compelling mystery to documented fact reveals something fundamental about how we construct meaning from history, transforming a likely fabrication into a cultural artifact more valuable to us than the truth could ever be. In the perpetual darkness of the mesopelagic zone, approximately 2,000 feet beneath the surface of the ocean, exists a creature so anatomically peculiar that its very existence challenges our understanding of evolutionary adaptation and sensory perception. And this creature is known as the Barreleye Fish, a deep-sea dweller that possesses one of the most unsettling visual systems ever documented in the animal kingdom. The Barreleye fish, scientifically named Macropina microstoma, is a small translucent creature, rarely exceeding 6 inches in length, yet what makes this fish genuinely disturbing to observe is not its diminutive size, but rather its extraordinary head structure, which consists almost entirely of a transparent, fluid-filled dome that houses a pair of enormous tubular eyes that point directly upward into the darkness above. Eyes so large and so perfectly positioned that they dominate the entire cranial cavity and leave one wondering how such an organism could have possibly evolved such an impractical, almost nightmarish configuration. The psychological mechanism that makes the barreleye fish so unsettling lies in the fundamental violation of what we expect from a fish's anatomy, for the transparent head itself seems like an adaptation born from desperation rather than elegant design, as if evolution itself had reached a breaking point and simply left the creature's most vital organs exposed to the water around it, protected only by a thin membrane of glass-like tissue that offers almost no structural support. The eyes themselves represent an equally bizarre solution to the problem of seeing in absolute darkness. Elongated and positioned vertically, these organs can detect the faintest bioluminescent signals emanating from other creatures in the abyss. Yet the fish cannot move its eyes at all, instead rotating its entire body to change its field of vision, a constraint that seems to negate many of the advantages one would expect from possessing such specialized optical equipment. What persists as genuinely mysterious about the Barreleye fish is not merely its strange appearance, but rather the fundamental question of why such an extraordinarily fragile design has survived millions of years of evolution, when countless more conventionally structured deep-sea fish have also thrived in these same environments, and we have accepted this creature's existence almost casually, treating it as simply another example of deep-sea adaptation. When in fact it represents something far more unsettling, a living reminder that the rules of biological design we assume to be universal are far more flexible and far stranger than our terrestrial existence could ever prepare us to comprehend. Deep beneath the ocean's surface, at depths where sunlight has never penetrated and pressure would crush most living things instantly, there exist geological formations so alien and otherworldly that they seem to belong to another planet entirely, yet they remain one of Earth's most fascinating and poorly understood phenomena. These formations are called black smokers, and they represent one of the deep sea's most profound mysteries. Black smokers are hydrothermal vents, essentially underwater hot springs, that occur along the mid-ocean ridges where tectonic plates are pulling apart and molten rock rises from the Earth's interior toward the crust. When superheated water, reaching temperatures of around 400 degrees Fahrenheit or higher, emerges from these vents and meets the frigid ocean water surrounding it, a dramatic chemical reaction occurs that causes minerals suspended in the water to precipitate out and form dark, sooty plumes that resemble black smoke billowing from an underwater chimney, hence their haunting name. The water flowing from these vents is incredibly rich in minerals like iron sulfide and other compounds that give the plumes their characteristic dark appearance and create towering chimneys of mineral deposits that can reach heights of several stories. What makes black smokers truly mysterious and profoundly unsettling is not merely their existence, but what thrives around them and what we still do not comprehend about their role in Earth's geological and biological systems. Around these vents, despite the complete absence of sunlight, the extreme pressures, and the toxic chemicals, entire ecosystems have evolved that seem to defy everything we thought we understood about the requirements for life itself. Chemosynthetic bacteria and bizarre organisms like giant tube worms, eyeless shrimp with light-sensing organs on their backs, and translucent fish with bioluminescent features cluster around these vents in dense communities, drawing energy not from the sun but from the chemical energy in the superheated mineral-rich water. The psychological unease surrounding black smokers stems from their radical foreignness and our inability to fully map or understand them, even as we have mapped the moon's surface in greater detail than we have mapped the ocean floor where these vents exist. We have discovered hundreds of black smokers, yet thousands may exist undiscovered, and each one represents a completely unknown ecosystem that could harbor life forms we have never cataloged or even imagined. In the abyssal depths of the ocean, where sunlight has never penetrated and pressure crushes with the force of mountains, there exists a creature so perfectly adapted to its environment that it seems almost otherworldly in its design, a being called the Pelican Eel, a fish that inhabits waters between 2,000 and 4,000 meters below the surface, far deeper than most people can even comprehend. The pelican eel possesses a body structure that defies conventional understanding of fish anatomy, with an enormous mouth that can unhinge to nearly impossible proportions, capable of expanding to accommodate prey items significantly larger than its own head, creating a visage that seems borrowed from nightmares rather than nature. This peculiar mouth leads to an elongated, serpentine body that extends backward from the head like a ribbon of flesh, tapering gradually into a thin filament that extends nearly as long as the rest of the body combined, and along this whip-like tail structure runs a bioluminescent photophore that produces light in the absolute darkness of the deep ocean. The creature's eyes, positioned far back on its head and oriented upward, suggest a predatory strategy perfectly suited to hunting in three-dimensional darkness where light signals mean everything, where a tiny flash or glow might indicate the presence of edible organisms drifting through the void. What makes the pelican eel truly fascinating, however, is not merely its appearance, but the questions its existence raises about adaptation and survival in extreme environments, about how creatures with such specialized anatomies came to evolve in isolation from the world we inhabit. The psychological impact of encountering images or footage of the pelican eel stems from the recognition that this creature operates by entirely different rules than we do, that its hunting strategies and sensory priorities represent a completely alien approach to existence, triggering in human observers an instinctive unease born from incomprehension. We struggle to rationalize its elongated form, its cavernous mouth, and its reliance on bioluminescence because these features violate our intuitive understanding of how animals should look and behave, creating cognitive dissonance that persists even as we learn the logical explanations for every feature. Despite our understanding of deep-sea adaptation, despite knowing scientifically why the pelican eel evolved this way, why its mouth developed such capacity and its tail such unusual length, we continue to regard it with something approaching dread, as if knowledge itself cannot fully dispel the fundamental strangeness it represents. Throughout maritime history, fishermen and coastal communities have reported discovering enormous, gelatinous masses washing ashore on beaches around the world, creatures so bizarre and unidentifiable that they have been named globsters, a term combining glob and monster to describe these shapeless, decomposing organisms. The most famous globster, discovered on a beach in Tasmania in 1960, measured over 20 feet in length and weighed approximately 5 tons, consisting of an amorphous, whitish flesh that defied conventional classification, leading some observers to speculate wildly about unknown deep-sea leviathans or even creatures from unexplored ocean depths that had somehow perished and drifted to shore. Similar discoveries have occurred in Newfoundland, the Azores, Chile, and numerous other coastal regions, each one seeming to represent a completely different species, yet each one equally mysterious and resistant to straightforward identification by marine biologists. What makes these discoveries so psychologically compelling is our fundamental human need to categorize and understand the natural world, and when confronted with something that appears to exist outside our existing taxonomies of life, our minds naturally gravitate toward explanations involving the unknown or the undiscovered, the idea that the ocean still harbors secrets that science has not yet unveiled. The reality is far more mundane, yet somehow more unsettling in its own way, because globsters are almost certainly the decomposed remains of known creatures such as whales, sharks, or giant squid, whose decomposition process is so thorough and transformative that they become nearly unrecognizable, their skeletal structures collapsing, their flesh separating and liquefying into a gelatinous consistency that bears no resemblance to the animal they once were. Yet despite this rational explanation being well established within marine biology, globsters continue to capture public imagination and generate sensational headlines suggesting they represent undiscovered species. Perhaps because acknowledging the scientific explanation requires us to confront the reality of death and decay in its most extreme and visually disturbing form. The persistence of globster mystery narratives demonstrates how we have normalized a particular kind of storytelling about the ocean, one in which the deep sea remains perpetually uncharted territory populated by unknowable beings, even as our actual scientific knowledge has expanded tremendously. In the year 2011, scientists exploring the hydrothermal vents of the Kiwa-Hirsuta region discovered something that would challenge our understanding of deep-sea life in the most unsettling ways imaginable. A creature so alien in appearance that it seemed to belong to another world entirely, and they named it the Yeti Crab because of the silky, hair-like setae that covered its claws and legs in a manner that suggested something between animal and mineral. Something that defied easy categorization. This remarkable crustacean, found approximately 9,000 feet below the surface of the South Pacific Ocean, possessed an appearance so unusual that marine biologists initially struggled to comprehend how such a creature could have evolved in Earth's oceans. With its pale, almost ghostly coloration, and those distinctive furry appendages that caught and held light in ways that seemed almost deliberately designed to unsettle the human observer. The Yeti crab belongs to a family previously thought to contain only a handful of species, yet here was this entirely new form, thriving in conditions of extreme pressure, near absolute darkness, and temperatures that would liquefy most organisms. suggesting that the deep ocean floor remains fundamentally unknown to us despite centuries of exploration. What makes the Yeti crab particularly psychologically troubling is the way it embodies our persistent uncertainty about the living world surrounding us. The unsettling reality that we share our planet with entire ecosystems that operate on principles we barely understand, creatures that have evolved solutions to survival problems we cannot fully articulate, and in studying the Yeti crab, scientists were forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that vast regions of Earth remain as alien as distant planets. The creature's hair-like structures, upon closer examination, were found to harbor filamentous bacteria, leading researchers to conclude that the Yeti crab may have actually cultivated these microorganisms as a food source, representing a symbiotic relationship so fundamental that it blurs the line between organism and ecosystem, between individual and collective. A relationship that suggests cooperation and intentionality in ways that make us question whether our definitions of life itself might be incomplete. Yet despite the discovery of the Yeti crab and the comprehensive documentation of its existence, it remains largely unknown to the general public, a mysterious inhabitant of the abyss that most people will never see or even know existed. And this strange absence of cultural impact speaks to how we have normalized the existence of undiscovered species in our own world, treating them as abstract scientific facts rather than profound mysteries. Deep within the twilight zone of the ocean, where sunlight becomes nothing more than a fading memory and pressure crushes down with the weight of mountains, there exists a creature so alien in its appearance and behavior that it challenges our understanding of life itself. The Atolla Jellyfish, sometimes called the alarm jellyfish, represents one of the ocean's most perplexing mysteries, not because of what it is, but because of what it does when threatened. This creature, translucent and ghostly, drifts through the water column at depths between 1,000 and 3,000 feet, where few humans have ever ventured and fewer still have witnessed its extraordinary defense mechanism in its natural habitat. When a predator approaches, the Atolla performs an astonishing display of bioluminescence, creating what scientists describe as a burglar alarm, a desperate light show that illuminates its entire bell in rapid, pulsating waves of blue and green luminescence. This behavior serves a purpose that seems almost counterintuitive to survival, as the jellyfish essentially advertises its own presence to anything capable of seeing light in the darkness, yet this strange adaptation persists across countless generations of these creatures. The mechanism behind this behavior stems from a biological logic that defies our initial assumptions about self-preservation. Rather than hiding from danger, the Atolla instead summons larger predators to the scene, creatures that might attack whatever is attempting to eat the jellyfish itself. It is a remarkable gambit, trading certain danger for uncertain rescue, sacrificing discretion for a calculated bet that something larger and more fearsome will intervene on its behalf. The psychological weight of this strategy, if we can assign such a term to a creature without consciousness as we understand it, suggests that the Atolla has evolved to understand its own vulnerability in such a complete way that it has weaponized desperation itself. What persists as genuinely mysterious is how this behavior became encoded into the jellyfish's genetic blueprint in the first place, how countless failed attempts at this dangerous strategy did not eliminate the trait entirely, and how the Atolla continues to employ this risky gambit despite the fundamental unpredictability of deep-sea rescue. We have normalized this behavior through scientific classification and documentation, yet every time an Atolla triggers its alarm, it remains an act of pure biological desperation, a creature betting everything on the mercy of the darkness surrounding it. In the waters off the western coast of Canada, particularly around Vancouver Island and the Strait of Georgia, there exists a creature that has haunted maritime folklore and captured the imagination of cryptozoologists for nearly 2 centuries, a being known as the Cadborosaurus or Caddy, named after Cadborough Bay, where numerous sightings have been reported throughout the years. The creature is consistently described as an enormous serpentine or plesiosaur-like animal, allegedly measuring anywhere from 20 to 80 feet in length, with a small head, a long sinuous neck, humped back, and a distinctive tail that witnesses claim could propel the beast through the waters with remarkable speed and grace. What makes the Cadborosaurus particularly fascinating is the sheer volume and consistency of eyewitness accounts spanning generations. With over 300 documented sightings recorded since the early 1800s, including reports from respected ship captains, fishermen, and even military personnel who have maintained their credibility in all other aspects of their professional lives. The psychological mechanism underlying these persistent sightings likely stems from the human tendency to impose familiar patterns onto unfamiliar phenomena, a phenomenon known as pareidolia, wherein observers might interpret the shapes of large fish, whale populations, floating logs, or wave formations as something more extraordinary and structured than what actually exists before them. Additionally, the ocean remains one of Earth's final frontiers, with vast underwater territories remaining largely unexplored and unmapped, creating fertile ground for the imagination to populate the unknown depths with creatures that might have survived from prehistoric eras, appealing to our deep desire to believe that mystery and undiscovered life still exists in our modern world. What remains peculiar is how the Cadborosaurus legend persists despite the complete absence of physical evidence, skeletal remains, or any definitive photographic proof that would withstand scientific scrutiny. Yet the creature continues to be discussed seriously in maritime communities, featured in regional tourism materials, and investigated by dedicated researchers who refuse to dismiss the accumulated testimonies as mere imagination or misidentification, suggesting that sometimes our need to believe in the unknown outweighs our requirement for tangible proof. Perhaps it is this very absence of proof that preserves the Cadborosaurus in the cultural imagination, for a creature that remains forever elusive and unconfirmed possesses a kind of immortality that no skeleton in a museum could ever achieve. In the deepest trenches of the ocean, where sunlight has never reached and pressure crushes with the force of thousands of tons per square inch, there exists a creature so alien in appearance that it seems less like a product of Earth's evolution and more like something that crawled from the nightmares of a fevered mind. The giant isopod, a distant relative of the common pill bug or roly-poly found in terrestrial gardens, grows to lengths of nearly 16 inches, with a segmented body that resembles a grotesque armor-plated nightmare. These creatures possess multiple pairs of legs, a hard exoskeleton that gleams with an unsettling pale gray or purplish hue, and eyes that seem to regard the darkness around them with an intelligence that feels profoundly wrong in such an alien form. The psychological effect of encountering photographic documentation of these creatures stems from the fundamental wrongness of their proportions and their appearance as a magnified version of something we instinctively find repulsive in its original, smaller form. The isopod triggers a deep ancestral unease because it represents a violation of scale, a crossing of the boundary between the tiny and the monstrous, between the insignificant and the threatening. We are evolutionarily programmed to fear things that look like recognizable creatures but appear wrong in fundamental ways, and the giant isopod embodies this violation perfectly. What makes this creature particularly unsettling is that despite decades of deep-sea exploration and countless expeditions to the abyssal zones where they dwell, we have barely scratched the surface of understanding their true prevalence, behavior, and role in the ecosystems of the deep. Scientists continue to discover new information about these creatures, yet we have somehow normalized our ignorance, accepting that vast portions of our planet remain utterly alien and unknowable, populated by organisms we can scarcely comprehend. In the crushing darkness of the abyssal plain, these isopods have adapted to scavenge the sparse offerings of organic matter that drift down from the sunlit world above, their slow metabolism allowing them to survive on mere scraps. Yet this very adaptation makes them seem like patient, inevitable harbingers of decay itself. Perhaps it is this role, as nature's ultimate cleaners, existing in a realm where death itself takes on a different meaning, that lends them their most disturbing quality. They are not monsters to us, but mirrors of a world so fundamentally removed from our own that we may as well be aliens observing Earth from another planet. Deep within the twilight zone of the ocean, where sunlight fades to absolute darkness and pressure becomes almost incomprehensible, there exists a creature so alien and so impossibly vast that it challenges our fundamental understanding of what a single organism truly is. The siphonophore is not merely a mysterious deep-sea dweller, but rather a living paradox, a colonial animal composed of hundreds or even thousands of individual polyps working in perfect biological harmony, creating structures that can stretch longer than the largest whales that swim above them. In 2014, researchers discovered a siphonophore specimen off the coast of Australia that measured approximately 150 feet in length. a creature so immense that it seemed to defy the constraints of individual animal physiology, yet it remained, impossibly, a single organism functioning as one unified being. The mechanics of this creature's existence revolve around extreme specialization of purpose, where different polyps have evolved to perform distinct biological functions, some dedicated entirely to locomotion, others to feeding, reproduction, sensory perception, and defense, each polyp contributing its singular expertise to the collective survival of the whole. This colonial structure creates a profound biological question that scientists continue to wrestle with, because the siphonophore exists in a conceptual space between singular organism and collective colony, challenging our taxonomic classifications and our very language for describing life itself. What remains so deeply unsettling about these creatures is not merely their grotesque appearance or their impossible dimensions, but rather the realization that we have normalized their existence without truly comprehending how such a radical departure from traditional animal organization actually functions at the cellular and genetic level, suggesting that the deep ocean may harbor countless other organizational schemes of life that operate according to principles we have yet to discover or even imagine. Perhaps most unsettling is the possibility that siphonophores represent merely one solution to the problem of survival in extreme environments, and that the deep ocean's darkness conceals entirely different forms of colonial organization, creatures assembled according to biological principles so foreign to our experience that we lack even the conceptual framework to recognize them as life at all. We have glimpsed only the faintest outline of the siphonophore's world, capturing fragmentary videos and still images of creatures that exist almost entirely beyond our capacity to study directly, leaving us to construct theories about their behavior and physiology from the smallest pieces of evidence. In the depths of the ocean, where sunlight never penetrates and pressure crushes all but the most resilient creatures, there exists a parasitic isopod so profoundly alien in its behavior that it challenges our understanding of what survival truly means. The tongue-eating louse, scientifically known as Cymothoa exigua, represents one of nature's most disturbing examples of parasitic takeover, a creature that doesn't merely feed on its host but systematically replaces one of its most vital organs entirely. This small crustacean, no larger than a human fingernail, begins its life cycle by entering a fish through its gills, swimming through the bloodstream until it reaches the fish's tongue, where it then attaches itself with remarkable precision to the base of that muscular appendage. Once secured, the louse begins to drain the blood supply from the tongue, slowly starving the tissue of nutrients and oxygen until the tongue atrophies and dies, becoming nothing more than a withered husk. The truly unsettling aspect of this parasitic relationship is what happens next, for the louse does not simply occupy the space left behind by the dead tongue. Instead, it gradually fuses itself to the remaining stub, its own body taking on the functional role of the missing organ, essentially becoming the fish's new tongue in a process that defies conventional understanding of what a body part can be. The fish, somehow continuing to live and even feed despite this horrifying transformation, accepts this replacement as though it were always meant to be there, swimming through the darkness with a parasitic crustacean functioning as its mouth. The mechanism behind this nightmarish arrangement lies in the louse's evolutionary adaptation to deep-sea environments where resources are scarce and competition for food is brutal. By replacing rather than simply parasitizing, the louse ensures a permanent home and a guaranteed food source for its entire lifespan, while the fish, through some incomprehensible biological compromise, manages to survive this violation of its own anatomy. What makes this phenomenon truly disturbing is not merely the biological horror of it, but rather the realization that this arrangement persists, that it works, that countless fish throughout the ocean depths are swimming with creature tongues inside their mouths, and that this system has remained stable for countless generations, suggesting that somewhere in the vast timeline of evolution, this parasitic replacement became not an aberration but an acceptable part of the natural order. A permanent fixture in the deep sea's unforgiving ecosystem, where survival demands adaptations so profound that the very definition of an organism becomes impossible to determine. Deep beneath the surface of the ocean, in regions where sunlight has never penetrated and pressure crushes all but the most resilient organisms, sonar equipment and deep-sea cameras have occasionally detected what appear to be geometric structures arranged on the seafloor in patterns too deliberate to be natural formations, leading researchers and explorers to speculate about the existence of a sunken civilization or advanced structure that might exist in the abyssal depths. The most compelling evidence comes from anomalous acoustic signatures and unusual mineral deposits found in isolated underwater basins, combined with historical accounts from mariners and submersible operators who report witnessing arrangements of what could be constructed materials or architectural remnants in areas where conventional geological surveys would predict only barren rock and sediment. These observations have accumulated over decades, with each new deep-sea expedition adding fragmentary pieces of data that seem to suggest something deliberate exists far below. Though verification remains impossible due to the extreme conditions and the limitations of current technology in reaching and thoroughly examining these remote locations. The psychological appeal of this mystery operates on a fundamental human desire to discover that we are not alone in Earth's history, that perhaps other intelligent beings once inhabited or explored our planet's oceans, and that the greatest secrets still lie hidden not in distant galaxies, but in the one environment on Earth that remains largely unexplored and inaccessible to us. Our minds naturally seek patterns and meaning, and when sonar returns ambiguous readings or cameras capture unclear imagery from crushing depths, we unconsciously fill in the gaps with our expectations, our hopes, and our fears, transforming random geological formations into structured monuments and ordinary mineral deposits into evidence of lost engineering. What persists is a romantic notion that the deep ocean harbors ancient cities and civilizations waiting to be discovered, despite the geological implausibility of human or advanced civilizations existing in an environment completely hostile to surface life. Yet this narrative endures because the deep remains genuinely unknown to us, and in that profound unknowing, we cannot entirely dismiss the possibility, however remote, that something extraordinary might truly exist in those lightless realms below. In the depths of the ocean, roughly between 2,000 and 3,000 meters below the surface, where sunlight becomes nothing more than a distant memory, there exists a creature so elusive and so rarely encountered that scientists struggle to comprehend its basic behavioral patterns and life cycle. This is the ghost shark, a chimera known scientifically as Hydrolagus bemisi, a fish that appears almost translucent in the darkness of the abyss, its body adapted over millions of years to survive in conditions so extreme that most surface-dwelling creatures cannot even imagine such an existence. The ghost shark was first formally documented in the 1800s, yet despite nearly 2 centuries of scientific inquiry, we have accumulated remarkably little concrete knowledge about this mysterious deep-sea dweller. What we do know comes from rare specimens that have been hauled up in fishing nets or discovered during deep-sea exploration missions, and these encounters have revealed a creature with large glassy eyes, a tapered body, and an almost otherworldly appearance that seems almost too fantastical to be real. The psychological impact of discovering such creatures stems from the profound realization that our planet harbors entire ecosystems that remain fundamentally unknown to us, and that somewhere in the crushing darkness and frigid temperatures of the abyss, countless species continue their lives completely unobserved by human consciousness. There exists a logical mechanism behind our fascination with the ghost shark, and that mechanism is rooted in the confrontation between the boundaries of human knowledge and the vast unknown territories that still exist within our own world. The ghost shark represents a living enigma that defies the modern impulse to categorize, understand, and ultimately control every aspect of nature, and in that way it becomes almost metaphysical in its significance. What makes the ghost shark particularly unsettling is that despite all our technological advances in deep-sea exploration, from submersibles to remotely operated vehicles and sophisticated sonar systems, we continue to know more about the surface of Mars than we do about the creatures inhabiting the deepest ocean trenches. The ghost shark persists in this state of profound obscurity not because it is necessarily dangerous or aggressive, but simply because the environment in which it lives remains so hostile and inaccessible to human exploration that direct study remains extraordinarily difficult and expensive. We have somehow normalized this fundamental gap in our understanding, accepting that there exist creatures living on our own planet whose basic social structures, dietary preferences, and reproductive behaviors may remain unknown forever. In the autumn of 1896, the peaceful coastal town of St. Augustine, Florida became the center of one of marine science's most perplexing and enduring mysteries, when a massive, decomposed carcass washed ashore on Anastasia Beach, appearing to locals and curious onlookers as though some unfathomable creature from the deepest trenches of the ocean had been expelled from the darkness below. The remains were enormous, stretching approximately 35 feet in length, with a girth so substantial that it required significant effort from multiple men to move or examine the partially preserved tissue, which displayed a grayish-white coloration and a consistency that suggested advanced decomposition. The creature possessed what appeared to be large, fleshy appendages or arms extending from its body, along with a general morphology that defied easy categorization within the known taxonomies of marine biology, leading contemporary observers to theorize that science had encountered something entirely novel, perhaps even a living species that had remained unknown to human knowledge. Newspapers across the nation seized upon the discovery with sensationalist fervor, publishing elaborate illustrations and accounts that captured public imagination and sparked genuine scientific debate about what manner of organism could produce such a bewildering form. However, when specimens were eventually analyzed more thoroughly by marine experts and zoologists, the explanation proved far more mundane than the initial fervor had suggested, as the remains were ultimately identified as belonging to a sperm whale or large basking shark in an advanced state of decay. With the mysterious appendages explained as decomposed muscle tissue and fat deposits that had separated from the carcass and taken on unfamiliar shapes through the processes of putrefaction and ocean currents. What psychological mechanism allowed so many educated observers to leap from visual ambiguity to the conclusion of an unknown species was primarily the human tendency to impose narrative meaning upon incomplete sensory data, combined with the particular cultural moment of the 1890s when the ocean itself remained largely unmapped and mysterious, creating space in the collective consciousness for genuinely unknown megafauna to potentially exist in the unexplored depths. The enduring fascination with the St. Augustine Monster, despite conclusive scientific explanations, reveals how the mystery itself becomes more emotionally compelling and memorable than the solution, how we tend to retain the legend rather than the resolution, and how the liminal space between knowledge and ignorance exerts a peculiar gravitational pull on human curiosity that the comfortable certainty of fact cannot quite overcome. In the deepest regions of the ocean, where sunlight has never penetrated and pressure crushes with unimaginable force, one of nature's most profound and alien ecosystems unfolds in complete darkness around the carcasses of dead whales, creating what marine biologists call whale falls. When a whale dies, whether from age, disease, or predation, its massive body eventually sinks to the abyssal plain, descending through thousands of feet of water until it comes to rest on the seafloor, where it becomes a temporary but incredibly significant source of nutrients and energy in an environment where food is desperately scarce and survival depends entirely on the sporadic arrival of organic matter from above. The process unfolds in distinct phases, beginning with a mobile scavenging stage during which large sharks, hagfish, and other deep-sea predators converge on the carcass from seemingly nowhere, drawn by chemical signals that travel through the water and alert them to this rare bounty, and these animals can consume hundreds of pounds of flesh in a remarkably short time, working with mechanical efficiency to strip away soft tissue and muscle. What follows is an enrichment phase lasting months or even years, during which a specialized community of bone-eating bacteria, crustaceans, and other organisms colonize the remaining skeleton, breaking down lipids stored within the bone matrix and creating localized zones of oxygen-depleted sediment that support unique chemosynthetic bacteria similar to those found around hydrothermal vents. The final stage, lasting potentially a decade or more, involves slow decomposition as the skeleton becomes increasingly brittle and integrates into the surrounding sediment, eventually becoming a fossil or dissolving entirely into the chemical makeup of the ocean floor. The psychological intrigue surrounding whale falls stems from the profound alienness of witnessing an ecosystem so utterly dependent on death, where the very concept of resource availability is inverted compared to the world we know, and where thousands of specialized organisms have evolved exclusively to exploit this singular food source that arrives unpredictably and then disappears entirely. We find ourselves drawn to this phenomenon because it reveals a hidden truth about the ocean depths, a realm that remains more mysterious than the surface of the moon, where entire populations of creatures exist in perpetual darkness, dependent on the generosity of occasional whale corpses and the slow rain of dead organisms called marine snow. In the deepest trenches of our oceans, where sunlight has never penetrated and the pressure would crush most living creatures instantly, there exists a creature that seems to belong to an entirely different era of Earth's history, a living relic that has remained virtually unchanged for millions of years. The Sixgill shark is one of the most primordial predators still swimming through our world's waters, a being that appears to have survived since the time of dinosaurs with minimal evolutionary modification, lurking in the abyssal depths where human exploration remains frustratingly limited. These creatures can reach lengths of 16 feet or more, possessing a body plan so ancient and efficient that nature has seen no need to alter it significantly across countless millennia, moving through the darkness with a methodical patience that speaks to evolutionary success beyond our comprehension. What makes the Sixgill shark particularly unsettling is how little we actually understand about its behavior and distribution. For despite its substantial size and its presence in oceans worldwide, documented encounters with living specimens remain remarkably rare and often accidental, leaving marine biologists with more questions than answers about its daily existence. The psychological mechanism behind our fascination with the Sixgill shark stems from a fundamental recognition that we share our planet with creatures whose lives operate entirely outside our ability to observe or predict, beings that exist in a realm so alien and inaccessible that they might as well inhabit another world entirely. There is something profoundly disquieting about knowing that an apex predator of considerable size moves through the abyssal zones of every major ocean on Earth while remaining almost entirely invisible to human awareness, operating in an environment that defies our normal sensory understanding. Yet what persists despite this logical disconnection is our continued assumption that we possess adequate knowledge of our own planet's ecosystems, that we have cataloged and understood the significant life forms that share our biosphere, when in reality creatures like the Sixgill shark demonstrate conclusively that vast territories of our world remain uncharted and populated by residents whose behaviors and populations we can scarcely estimate. The Sixgill shark represents not merely a mystery, but rather a humbling reminder that human dominion over knowledge of Earth remains superficial, and that some of nature's most formidable residents conduct their entire existence in a realm where we remain perpetual outsiders, strangers in the dark. In the absolute darkness of the midnight zone, where sunlight has never penetrated and pressure would crush most living things instantly, there exists a creature so perfectly adapted to this alien environment that it seems less like a fish and more like a nightmare given form. The Stoplight Loosejaw, scientifically known as Malacosteus niger, represents one of nature's most unsettling predatory designs, a fish that has evolved capabilities so specialized and so deeply disturbing that it challenges our understanding of what evolution can produce when freed from the constraints of the surface world. This creature dwells at depths between 2,000 and 5,000 feet, in waters where the temperature hovers just above freezing and where the darkness is so complete that the concept of vision seems almost irrelevant. And yet this fish has developed a hunting mechanism that relies entirely on a form of sight that no other creature in the deep sea can perceive. The Stoplight Loosejaw possesses bioluminescent organs called photophores that produce light in the red spectrum, a wavelength that most deep-sea creatures cannot detect because red light is absorbed almost immediately by seawater and becomes invisible in the darkness below. This means that the Loosejaw can see prey illuminated only by its own red bioluminescence while remaining effectively invisible to its prey and to virtually every other predator in its environment, creating a one-sided hunting advantage so profound that it seems almost unfair in its efficiency. The fish's jaw is hinged in such a way that it can unhinge completely, unfolding downward to create a gaping maw that can swallow prey nearly as large as itself, and its teeth are arranged in patterns that suggest countless evolutionary refinements toward the singular purpose of capturing and holding desperately struggling victims in near total darkness. What makes the Stoplight Loosejaw genuinely terrifying to contemplate is not merely its physical adaptations, but the psychological reality of what those adaptations represent. A creature that has evolved to become an almost perfect predator in an environment where other organisms cannot possibly defend themselves or escape, because they lack the sensory apparatus to even know they are being hunted. It is a predator that hunts with absolute impunity in a realm where its prey are fundamentally blind to its presence. And this fundamental asymmetry in perception has become so normalized within the deep-sea ecosystem that it simply exists as one more layer of predation and survival in an environment defined by relentless competition. In the perpetual darkness of the mesopelagic zone, where sunlight becomes nothing more than a distant memory and pressure crushes with unimaginable force, there exists a creature so peculiar that its very existence challenges our understanding of how life adapts to extreme environments. The telescope octopus, known scientifically as Amphitrechus pelagicus, represents one of the ocean's most enigmatic predators, and what makes this animal particularly unsettling is not merely its appearance, but rather the profound mystery surrounding how it hunts and survives in one of Earth's most hostile domains. Unlike its shallow water cousins, the telescope octopus possesses a body plan that seems almost alien in its construction, with a small, gelatinous sac-like mantle and extraordinarily elongated arms that can stretch to lengths many times that of its central body, giving it a spindly, skeletal appearance that haunts the imagination. Most striking, however, are its massive tubular eyes that protrude from its head like two biological telescopes, capable of rotating and focusing with a precision that suggests this creature has evolved to exploit some specific visual advantage in the lightless depths where it dwells. Scientists have observed specimens with these eye structures positioned in ways that allow them to gaze simultaneously upward toward the faint bioluminescent signals filtering from above while maintaining awareness of their immediate surroundings. Yet the precise mechanism of how these eyes function in near-total darkness remains poorly understood despite decades of study. The psychological impact of encountering descriptions of this animal stems from the realization that we have mapped more of the lunar surface than we have thoroughly explored the ocean depths, where creatures like the telescope octopus conduct their existence entirely beyond our observation, suggesting that what we think we know about deep-sea life represents only the smallest fraction of the actual diversity and complexity present in those waters. Despite our advancing technology and increasingly sophisticated deep-sea exploration capabilities, we continue to discover that the telescope octopus remains largely a mystery in terms of its complete life cycle, its hunting strategies, and its ecological role within the abyssal community, which is perhaps the most unsettling aspect of all. We have normalized the existence of countless undiscovered species in the deep ocean, accepting without much reflection that entire ecosystems function beyond our understanding. And this normalization paradoxically makes the unknown feel more intimate and immediate than it perhaps should, as though we are living alongside creatures whose lives intersect with ours in ways we may never fully comprehend. Deep within the world's oceans, there exists a phenomenon so sudden and catastrophic that even modern maritime science struggled for decades to accept its existence. A wall of water that rises without warning from seemingly calm seas, appearing almost as if summoned by some unseen force beneath the surface. These are rogue waves, also called freak waves or monster waves, sudden swells that can reach heights of over 100 feet, appearing from nowhere to strike vessels with devastating force before vanishing as mysteriously as they arrived. What makes rogue waves truly terrifying is not merely their size, but their unpredictability, their apparent defiance of the normal patterns of ocean behavior, the way they contradict everything sailors and oceanographers believed they understood about wave formation and ocean dynamics. Throughout maritime history, ships have reported encounters with these anomalies, massive walls of water that seem to appear instantaneously from relatively calm conditions, waves so towering and so violent that they could snap the hulls of cargo ships, capsize fishing vessels, and send experienced sailors into states of genuine psychological trauma. The mechanism behind rogue waves involves a complex interplay of oceanic and atmospheric conditions, wherein multiple wave systems traveling in different directions converge and amplify one another, creating constructive interference patterns where individual waves combine their energy into a single catastrophic surge. When deep ocean swells from distant storms interact with local wind-driven waves, and these systems align with ocean currents and underwater topography, the resulting wave can achieve heights that far exceed the theoretical maximum predicted by linear wave theory, creating a phenomenon that oceanographers now understand through the lens of nonlinear physics and chaotic systems. Yet despite this scientific understanding, rogue waves retain an air of mystery and dread, perhaps because they represent something fundamentally unknowable about the ocean itself. A reminder that even with our instruments and equations and satellite monitoring systems, the sea retains the capacity to surprise us with sudden and overwhelming force. The normalization of rogue waves in modern maritime consciousness reflects a peculiar human tendency to accept danger once it has been classified and explained, to transform genuine terror into manageable risk through the application of science, even as individual encounters with these waves continue to result in loss of life and property. Ships continue to sink, sailors continue to disappear, and yet we sail forward, accepting rogue waves as simply another cost of our relationship with the ocean. In the year 2007, marine biologists studying specimens collected from the depths of the Southern Ocean near Antarctica made a discovery that would challenge everything we thought we understood about deep-sea cephalopods. A single preserved specimen of what appeared to be an entirely new species of squid, which researchers named Promachoteuthis sulcus. A creature so bizarre in its appearance that it seemed almost deliberately designed to provoke unease and revulsion in anyone who gazed upon its preserved form. The specimen itself was remarkably small, measuring only a few inches in length, yet its facial structure displayed characteristics so unusual and unsettling that the scientific community found itself divided between those who saw genuine zoological significance and those who questioned whether they were examining something real or merely an artifact of decomposition and preservation damage. The creature appeared to possess what looked unmistakably like lips, thick and fleshy structures surrounding the mouth in a configuration that seemed almost disturbingly human-like, reminiscent of a grimacing face frozen in an eternal expression of anguish or malevolence, and this anthropomorphic quality, combined with the specimen's otherworldly appearance, rapidly transformed it from a routine taxonomic discovery into an object of fascination and speculation across internet communities and casual observers of marine biology alike. The psychological mechanism underlying our intense reaction to this creature operates on a fundamental level of pattern recognition and the uncanny valley effect, wherein biological forms that appear almost but not quite human trigger a profound sense of discomfort within our brains, because we are evolutionarily attuned to recognize human facial features and social cues, and when we encounter something that mimics these features in an alien context, it creates a cognitive dissonance that generates feelings of wrongness and dread regardless of the actual danger the creature poses. What makes Promachoteuthis particularly persistent in our cultural consciousness, despite its extremely limited actual evidence and significance, is precisely this quality of seeming to bridge the gap between the familiar and the utterly foreign, between the human and the inhuman, creating a perfect storm of psychological discomfort that ensures people continue to share images and discuss the creature long after scientists have moved on to more substantive discoveries in marine biology. In the deepest and darkest regions of the ocean floor, where sunlight has never penetrated and pressure would crush most living creatures instantly, there exists a creature so unusual and so perfectly adapted to its grim niche that it seems almost impossible that evolution could have designed such a thing. These are the bone-eating worms, scientifically known as ostacs, and they represent one of the ocean's most disturbing and efficient recycling mechanisms. When a whale dies and sinks to the bottom of the sea, it becomes what scientists call a whale fall, and these marine corpses provide the deep-sea ecosystem with rare and precious resources. For months or even years, the fallen whale remains on the seafloor, and Ostax worms emerge from the surrounding sediment and begin their grim work, boring directly into the bones of the decomposing carcass, using specialized appendages that secrete powerful acids capable of dissolving the very structure of calcium and phosphate that holds skeletal material together. What makes this process particularly unsettling is that these worms possess no mouth, no stomach, and no digestive system in any conventional sense, instead relying on symbiotic bacteria that live within their tissues to break down the lipids and proteins stored within the bone matrix itself. The worms exist in a state of perpetual feeding, their soft bodies extending into microscopic tunnels they carve through bone like living tools, their only existence defined by the consumption of the dead. We often think of the deep ocean as a realm of scavengers and predators locked in eternal struggle, But the bone-eating worms represent something far more alien to our understanding, a creature that has abandoned the need for movement, sensory organs, or anything resembling what we would consider a life in any meaningful way. They are living fossils in behavior if not in form, persisting in the darkness not because they have learned to thrive there, but because they are perfectly matched to a niche so specific and so grim that nothing else could ever occupy it, making them one of nature's most thorough and inevitable solutions to the problem of waste in an environment where nothing is ever wasted. A single whale fall can sustain populations of these worms for years, transforming a tragedy of the surface world into an unexpected abundance in the abyss. And when that abundance finally depletes, the worms simply wait in the sediment once more, their existence suspended in darkness until another corpse descends from above. In this way, the bone-eating worms embody a profound truth about the deep ocean, that even in Earth's most extreme and inhospitable environments, life finds not just a way to survive, but a way to transform death itself into the foundation of continued existence. In the absolute darkness of the deep ocean, where sunlight has never penetrated and pressure would crush most living things instantly, there exists a creature so bizarre and seemingly purposeless that scientists still struggle to understand its fundamental nature and survival strategy. The Deepstaria Jelly, discovered in the depths off the coast of California in the 1960s, appears to be a translucent, gelatinous sac that drifts through the water like a living balloon, completely hollow inside, with no visible means of obtaining food or defending itself against predators that might consume it. When researchers first observed this creature through deep-sea submersibles and remotely operated vehicles, they noticed something deeply unsettling about its appearance. It looks less like a functional organism and more like a discarded membrane, a ghost of something that should have died long ago, yet somehow it persists in the crushing depths where virtually nothing else can survive. The creature's body is almost entirely transparent, which would seem to offer some camouflage advantage, but the cavity within its gelatinous form suggests it may trap other organisms inside, though scientists remain uncertain whether this represents active hunting or merely accidental capture. The psychological disturbance that the Deepstaria jelly provokes stems from its fundamental inexplicability. Here is a living thing that violates our basic understanding of what an organism should be, possessing no obvious mouth, no clear digestive system, no apparent sensory organs, yet it continues to exist in the depths, drifting silently through the darkness like a sentient emptiness. We have normalized the existence of this creature by simply cataloging it, assigning it a scientific name, and moving on to study more comprehensible forms of life, yet the Deepstaria jelly remains one of the ocean's most profound mysteries, a reminder that the deep sea is a realm where the rules of life as we understand them simply may not apply. Perhaps this is the ocean's ultimate lesson, that life itself is far more adaptable and strange than our taxonomies allow, and that in the vast unexplored abysses still remaining, there may exist countless other creatures equally defiant of our categories, equally indifferent to the frameworks we use to understand existence. The Deepstaria jelly thus stands as a living emblem of our own ignorance, a creature that has forced marine biologists to confront the limits of their discipline and to accept that some organisms may operate according to principles we have yet to discover or may never fully comprehend. In the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, there exists a region known as the Sargasso Sea, a body of water bounded by ocean currents rather than by any physical landmass. And within these waters, there dwells a mystery that has puzzled marine biologists for centuries. The Sargasso Eels, creatures that appear to exist in a state of perpetual migration, yet never quite seem to arrive at any discernible destination. These remarkable organisms spend the vast majority of their lives in rivers and coastal waters throughout the Atlantic basin, growing and developing in freshwater and brackish environments. Yet at a certain point in their life cycle, an internal signal triggers an urge to migrate back to the Sargasso Sea, the supposed birthplace of their species, a journey that takes them thousands of miles across open ocean toward a destination that no scientist has ever definitively confirmed as an actual breeding ground. The eels navigate by instinct alone, following currents and magnetic fields that their bodies can somehow sense, driven by a biological imperative so profound that they will abandon feeding, shrink their digestive systems, and commit themselves entirely to the exhausting voyage across the Atlantic. What makes this phenomenon particularly unsettling is the profound mystery surrounding what actually happens when these eels reach their destination. For no human being has ever observed Sargasso eels breeding in their supposed native waters, no larvae have been definitively captured and studied, and no complete life cycle has ever been documented from beginning to end within that mysterious sea. The psychological mechanism underlying our fascination with this mystery stems from a fundamental human need to understand purpose and completion, the desire to trace a beginning to its end, and to comprehend the full narrative arc of a creature's existence. Yet the Sargasso eels deny us this satisfaction. We have normalized the existence of this mystery by incorporating it into textbooks and educational frameworks, treating it as simply another unsolved biological puzzle that future technology might eventually resolve. Yet we rarely pause to contemplate the strangeness of it all, the reality that millions of eels undertake a deadly journey toward a destination that may not exist in any meaningful sense. Guided by instincts evolved over millions of years to reach a place no living scientist has ever confirmed, driven by purposes we can theorize about but never truly understand. Perhaps this is the true horror of the Sargasso eels, not that they fail to complete their journey, but that they succeed in it anyway, arriving at coordinates written into their very being, fulfilling a biological contract whose terms remain forever sealed away from human comprehension. In the deepest, most inhospitable regions of the ocean floor, where hydrothermal vents pierce the Earth's crust and expel superheated water reaching temperatures of nearly 400 degrees Fahrenheit, there exists a creature so impossibly adapted to extreme conditions that it challenges everything we thought we understood about the limits of life itself. The Pompeii worm, discovered in 1979 near the Galapagos Islands, appears as a ghostly, pale organism measuring roughly 2 inches in length, its body covered in what scientists initially believed to be simple hair-like structures, but which turned out to be something far more extraordinary and deeply unsettling. These structures are not the worm's own tissue at all, but rather colonies of heat-loving bacteria that have established what can only be described as a symbiotic relationship so complete that neither organism can survive without the other, creating a biological union that seems to blur the very definition of what constitutes an individual creature. The worm's ability to exist at temperatures that would instantly cook any other known animal stems from specialized proteins in its cells that prevent denaturation, and its heat shock proteins function so efficiently that the creature appears to experience almost no cellular damage despite living in an environment that would obliterate conventional life. Yet what makes the Pompeii worm truly terrifying is not merely its alien physiology, but rather the profound realization that it represents a form of life so radically different from anything in the sunlit world that we may be fundamentally incapable of understanding how consciousness, if it exists in such a being, might perceive reality in an environment where the very concept of comfort or suffering could be inverted from our perspective. Scientists continue to study these creatures in their natural habitat, discovering new species of extremophile organisms every year. Yet with each discovery comes the unsettling awareness that the deep ocean floor may harbor thousands of species completely unknown to science, living in conditions so severe that they occupy an entirely separate tier of biological possibility from the rest of Earth's ecosystem, existing almost as though on an alien world beneath our feet. Thriving in the darkness and heat, while we remain bound to the narrow parameters of survivable conditions that define our existence above. The Pompeii worm stands as a humbling reminder that life on Earth is far stranger and more resilient than our surface-dwelling perspective allows us to comprehend, and perhaps the most unsettling truth is that we have likely only scratched the surface of discovering what forms existence can actually take. In the abyssal depths of the ocean, where sunlight has never reached and pressure crushes with the weight of mountains, there exists a creature so peculiar and so alien that its very existence challenges our understanding of life itself. And this creature is known as the Dumbo octopus, named for the ear-like fins that protrude from its gelatinous body in a manner eerily reminiscent of the Disney character. These octopuses inhabit depths between 2,000 and 7,000 meters below the surface, existing in a realm of complete and utter darkness where temperatures hover just above freezing and food is so scarce that every calorie consumed represents a monumental victory against starvation. The Dumbo octopus moves through this lightless void with an almost ghostly grace, its translucent body appearing as little more than a floating specter, and its enormous eyes, disproportionately large relative to its body size, stare perpetually into the abyss with what seems like an expression of infinite sadness and resignation. What makes these creatures particularly unsettling is their remarkable rarity in scientific observation, for despite decades of deep-sea exploration, we have managed to encounter and document only a handful of Dumbo octopus specimens, and each encounter raises more questions than it answers about how these organisms survive in conditions that seem fundamentally incompatible with biological existence. The psychological mechanism that makes the Dumbo octopus so deeply disturbing relates to our fundamental inability to comprehend truly alien forms of existence. For these creatures operate under biological and physical principles so different from our own that observing them feels like watching something that should not exist according to our understanding of nature itself. We have normalized the existence of these deep-sea horrors by cataloging them and filing them away in scientific databases. Yet the uncomfortable truth persists that we know virtually nothing about their behavior, their reproduction, their social structures, if any exist, or even the basic mechanisms by which they maintain consciousness in an environment that seems fundamentally hostile to all known forms of awareness. The Dumbo octopus remains one of the ocean's most persistent mysteries precisely because it exists just beyond the threshold of our ability to study it comprehensively, and every image captured from deep-sea expeditions shows us only the faintest glimpse of a creature that has learned to thrive in the one place on Earth where thriving should be impossible. Deep beneath the waters off the coast of Bimini in the Bahamas lies a formation that has captivated explorers, archaeologists, and believers in lost civilizations for decades. A structure known as the Bimini Road, which consists of a series of limestone blocks arranged in a seemingly deliberate pattern along the ocean floor at a depth of approximately 25 feet. The formation stretches for roughly 800 meters in a relatively straight line, with individual blocks measuring between 6 and 15 feet in length, and they appear to be fitted together with a precision that initially suggested to many observers that this could not be a natural geological occurrence, but rather evidence of an ancient advanced human civilization, possibly even the legendary Atlantis that Plato wrote about so many centuries ago. When the formation was first discovered in 1968 by pilot Robert Brush, who spotted unusual geometric patterns while flying over the shallow waters, the discovery ignited a firestorm of speculation and excitement, with proponents of the lost continent theory arguing that this underwater road was unmistakable proof of a sophisticated prehistoric society that had mastered engineering and construction on a grand scale. However, geological examination and scientific analysis have revealed a far less mysterious explanation for the Bimini Road, as researchers determined that the limestone blocks are actually the result of natural fracturing and erosion processes that occur when limestone bedrock breaks apart along its natural stress lines and joint patterns, creating blocks that appear far more regular and intentional than they actually are. The human mind possesses a powerful tendency to recognize patterns and impose order upon randomness, a psychological phenomenon known as pareidolia, which causes us to see faces in clouds and structures in random rock formations, and this cognitive bias operates with particular intensity when we encounter something in an exotic or remote location that we do not fully understand. The blocks of the Bimini Road, despite being entirely natural in origin, were perceived as arranged because our brains are fundamentally wired to detect intention and design in our environment, a survival mechanism that evolved to help our ancestors identify both opportunities and threats in their surroundings. Deep beneath the surface of our oceans, far beyond where sunlight penetrates and pressure crushes all but the most adapted organisms, exists a realm so extreme and so fundamentally alien to human experience that we have only begun to comprehend its nature in the most superficial ways. This is the Hadal Zone, named after Hades, the Greek underworld, and it represents the deepest portions of Earth's oceanic trenches, those abyssal canyons that plunge downward for nearly 7 miles into the planetary crust. The Mariana Trench, located in the western Pacific Ocean, descends to depths exceeding 36,000 feet, creating an environment where the pressure reaches over 1,000 times what we experience at sea level, where temperatures hover just above freezing, where darkness is so complete and absolute that it becomes almost meaningless to speak of vision at all. In these depths, life persists in forms so bizarre and so fundamentally different from anything we know that they challenge our understanding of biology itself. Creatures with translucent bodies and bioluminescent organs, fish with teeth far too large for their mouths, amphipods and snailfish that have never encountered sunlight in their entire evolutionary history. The psychological mechanism that renders the hadal zone so deeply unsettling operates on multiple levels simultaneously. First, there is the simple incomprehensibility of the environment itself, a place where human survival is impossible without extraordinary technological intervention, where our bodies would be crushed to nothing in seconds, and where we cannot rely on any of our sensory apparatus to understand what surrounds us. Second, there is the disturbing recognition that this zone remains largely unexplored, that we have better maps of the surface of the moon than we do of the deepest ocean trenches, that creatures living in the hadal zone may possess characteristics and abilities we have never documented, that entire ecosystems may thrive there in conditions we believe should preclude life entirely. Third, there is the conceptual terror that emerges from recognizing that our planet contains vast regions completely inaccessible to us, places where our knowledge and authority mean nothing, where we are not merely visitors but fundamentally unwelcome. Yet despite these logical reasons for maintaining a sense of wonder and caution about the hadal zone, we have largely normalized its existence into something almost mundane, treating it as merely another frontier to be eventually conquered and catalogued, rather than as a genuinely impenetrable mystery that may fundamentally reshape our understanding of what life means when liberated from the constraints we assumed were universal. In the deepest trenches of the ocean, where sunlight has never penetrated and pressure crushes with the force of thousands of atmospheres, there exists a creature so profoundly alien to our understanding that its very existence challenges our perception of what life can become. The blobfish, scientifically known as Pseudolaparus swirei, dwells at depths between 2,000 and 4,000 meters below the surface, inhabiting a realm so hostile that few organisms can survive there at all. When researchers have occasionally brought specimens to the surface through deep-sea trawling, the results have been nothing short of horrifying, revealing a gelatinous mass that seems to defy biological logic, a creature that appears almost formless, with a bulbous head and a body that sags and droops as if all structural integrity has been surrendered to gravity and despair. The reason for this grotesque transformation lies in a fundamental principle of physics and biology that operates invisibly in those crushing depths. The blobfish has evolved to exist in an environment where the pressure is so immense that its body composition has become almost entirely gelatinous, with minimal skeletal structure and a density nearly identical to the water surrounding it, allowing it to maintain neutral buoyancy and conserve energy in a world where food is scarce. When the creature ascends toward the surface during capture, the external pressure that has supported and shaped its existence for its entire life suddenly vanishes, and the internal pressure of its body, which evolved to match that extreme depth, causes the tissues to expand and distend catastrophically, transforming the fish from an organism perfectly adapted to its environment into a shapeless, grotesque blob that resembles nothing so much as biological failure. Yet what persists most terrifyingly in our collective consciousness is not the scientific explanation, which renders the phenomenon mundane and understandable, but rather the image itself, the visual documentation of this creature's suffering, which has become iconic in popular culture and social media. Shared endlessly as a symbol of deep-sea horror, despite the fact that the blobfish in its native habitat is actually a reasonably proportioned creature that fits perfectly into its ecological niche. We continue to circulate these disturbing images and stories, allowing them to inhabit our imagination of the deep ocean, even knowing full well that what we are seeing is not the true nature of the creature, but rather the violent consequences of removing it from its only possible world, a phenomenon we understand completely and yet remain unable to shake from our sense of oceanic dread and the unknowable mysteries that lurk in the absolute depths. Deep beneath the surface of the ocean, where sunlight has long since faded into complete and total darkness, there exists a phenomenon so pervasive and so fundamentally strange that it challenges our basic understanding of how life operates in the most extreme environments on Earth. Bioluminescence, the ability of living organisms to produce and emit their own light through chemical reactions within their bodies, appears throughout the deep sea with such frequency and variety that it has become the dominant form of communication, hunting, and survival in waters where no other light source exists. Countless species of fish, jellyfish, squid, and crustaceans have evolved the capacity to generate light through the oxidation of luciferin, a light-emitting compound, combined with the enzyme luciferase, creating photons that travel through the absolute darkness like underwater stars. What makes this phenomenon particularly unsettling is not merely the existence of these living lights, but rather the sheer abundance and deliberate sophistication of them throughout the deep ocean, suggesting that vast populations of creatures are constantly engaged in a conversation of light signals that we can barely comprehend or observe, creating an entire hidden universe of visual communication occurring just beyond the reach of human awareness. The psychological mechanism at work here stems from our deep ancestral need for light as a marker of safety and visibility. Yet bioluminescence inverts this expectation by making the darkness itself the medium through which life communicates, as if the ocean has learned to speak in the very absence of natural illumination. We understand the biological mechanisms well enough in the laboratory, where scientists have isolated the genes responsible and even transferred them into other organisms. Yet understanding the mechanism does not diminish the profound sense of alienation that comes from contemplating these living lights flashing in absolute darkness, millions of meters below the surface where human eyes will likely never witness their conversations directly. What persists despite our explanations is the existential weight of knowing that these bioluminescent displays represent an entirely parallel world of interaction and meaning occurring in the deepest parts of our planet, a constant silent language of light spoken in the darkness, and we remain largely unable to fully decode or truly witness what is being communicated between these creatures as they flash and glow throughout the endless night of the abyss. In the deepest abyssal plains of the ocean, where sunlight has never penetrated and the pressure would crush most living things into oblivion, there exists a creature so peculiar and so alien in appearance that it seems almost unreal. Yet it thrives in these lightless depths with an efficiency that rivals any surface organism. The sea pig, a holothurian or sea cucumber of the genus Scotta plains, moves across the ocean floor with deliberate slowness, extending its tentacle-like tube feet as it methodically grazes on the organic detritus that falls from the upper ocean layers like biological snow. These creatures, measuring anywhere from 4 to 12 inches in length, possess a bloated, translucent body that appears almost gelatinous, with a coloration ranging from pale yellow to deep burgundy, and they navigate the crushing darkness with sensory organs we are only beginning to understand. What makes the sea pig truly unsettling to contemplate is not merely its alien morphology, but rather the disturbing fact that these animals appear to travel in vast herds, sometimes numbering in the thousands per square kilometer, creating processions across the abyssal sediment in patterns that researchers cannot fully explain, moving in the same direction simultaneously as though responding to some imperceptible signal or following invisible highways etched into the seafloor. The mechanism behind this coordinated movement likely relates to chemoreception, pheromone trails left by preceding individuals, and the detection of microscopic food particles suspended in the water and accumulated on the bottom. Yet the sheer synchronization of these movements, the way entire populations shift direction in unison, suggests a level of sensory awareness and communication that contradicts our understanding of such simple organisms. Despite technological advances in deep-sea exploration and the mounting evidence from submersible observations and seafloor camera systems, we have somehow normalized these bizarre congregations, filing them away as mere examples of efficient feeding behavior without truly reckoning with the profound strangeness of thousands of gelatinous creatures moving in coordinated processions through complete and utter darkness. In an environment so hostile that it exists almost outside the realm of human comprehension. In the deepest regions of the ocean, far below the reach of sunlight, and in the crushing darkness where pressure becomes almost incomprehensible, there exists a phenomenon that oceanographers call marine snow, and it is perhaps one of the most haunting and alien processes occurring on our planet. Marine snow is not frozen precipitation as the name might suggest, but rather a continuous shower of organic debris that descends through the water column like a macabre snowfall in a world without seasons, without end. A perpetual cascade of death and decay that drifts down from the productive surface waters above toward the abyssal plains below. This material consists of dead plankton, fecal matter, fragments of dead fish, mucus, skin cells, and countless other organic particles that aggregate together into larger masses as they sink, and these particles move with agonizing slowness, taking weeks or even months to traverse the thousands of meters between the sunlit surface and the benthic zones where they finally come to rest. The psychological impact of contemplating marine snow emerges from understanding that this process represents a kind of continuous funeral dirge occurring everywhere in every ocean simultaneously. A constant reign of death that sustains the deep-sea ecosystem while simultaneously reminding us that the ocean floor is essentially a vast graveyard, a necropolis where the remains of surface life accumulate in endless layers. What makes this phenomenon particularly unsettling is the realization that we have normalized this grotesque process, that scientists casually describe it with clinical terminology as merely part of nutrient cycling and energy transfer. Yet what we are actually witnessing is an eternal, inescapable downward journey of organic matter through miles of dark water, a process so fundamental to ocean biology that life itself depends on this constant reign of death to survive. The creatures of the deep have evolved entire civilizations around waiting for this marine snow to arrive, some organisms remaining nearly motionless for extended periods, conserving energy while they wait for the next meal to drift down from above. And in this way, the surface world and the abyss remain connected through this grotesque conveyor belt of decomposing matter that falls endlessly into darkness. In the depths of the ocean, where sunlight has long since surrendered to absolute darkness, there exists a creature so impossibly thin and elongated that it defies our conventional understanding of what an animal body should be. The bootlace worm, scientifically known as Linnaeus longissimus, holds the distinction of being the longest animal ever recorded on Earth, with documented specimens stretching beyond 180 feet in length, yet possessing a body no thicker than a shoelace or the width of a pencil lid. These creatures inhabit the cold seafloor and rocky crevices of the North Atlantic, where they remain largely unseen and barely understood, existing in a form so alien to our terrestrial perspective that we struggle to comprehend how something so impossibly thin could possibly be alive. The mystery deepens when we consider the fundamental biological impossibility of their existence. A creature this long should theoretically require a circulatory system and organ distribution that would make their thinness physically impossible, yet they continue to thrive despite our inability to fully explain their anatomical logistics. Scientists have long grappled with how these worms manage their metabolic processes, how nutrients travel through such an extraordinarily elongated body, and how they maintain structural integrity without the kinds of support systems that other organisms require. The bootlace worm persists in our collective consciousness and scientific literature not because we have solved its mysteries, but rather because we have simply accepted that nature operates under rules far more flexible than our textbooks suggest, and we have learned to coexist with profound ignorance about the creatures sharing our planet. As you drift towards sleep, consider the unsettling reality that the ocean contains thousands of organisms like this, creatures fundamentally stranger than anything we have imagined, dwelling in absolute darkness where they have evolved into forms that challenge everything we thought we understood about biological possibility and the nature of life itself. And perhaps this is the greatest lesson the bootlace worm offers us, that our planet still harbors secrets so fundamental, so bizarre in their very existence, that we may never fully comprehend them, and that this ignorance, rather than diminishing our sense of wonder, should only deepen it. In the vast archives of marine biology, the bootlace worm remains a humble reminder that we are not the measure of all things, and that somewhere in the cold depths where pressure crushes and darkness reigns absolute, life has found a way to exist in forms that mock our attempts at categorization and understanding. In the perpetually dark waters of the deep ocean, where sunlight has never penetrated and pressure would crush most surface creatures instantly, there exists a creature so elusive and poorly understood that scientists have given it a name that reflects their own uncertainty: the giant phantom jelly. What makes this organism so profoundly mysterious is not merely its rarity or the difficulty in studying it, but rather the fundamental question of whether we truly understand what we are observing when we do encounter it. In the year 1988, a research submersible captured footage of an enormous, translucent gelatinous creature descending through the midnight zone of the ocean, a being that appeared to possess proportions inconsistent with known species of jellyfish or ctenophores, displaying an ethereal, almost ghost-like quality as it drifted through the absolute darkness. The creature's body seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly luminescence, and its movements suggested an intelligence or purposefulness that contradicted the passive drifting behavior typically associated with pelagic jellyfish. Scientists reviewing the footage found themselves unable to make a definitive taxonomic classification, and the specimen was never captured or properly documented through any means other than these fleeting video recordings. The psychological mechanism underlying our fascination with the giant phantom jelly relates fundamentally to our relationship with the unknown and our deep-seated need to categorize and understand all living things. When we encounter something that defies easy classification or scientific explanation, our minds naturally construct narratives around it, filling in gaps with speculation and inference. The deep ocean represents perhaps the final frontier of genuine scientific mystery on our own planet, and creatures like the phantom jelly embody our recognition that despite centuries of scientific advancement, vast portions of Earth remain utterly alien to us. What persists most strikingly about this enigma is how we have normalized the existence of creatures we cannot fully explain or document, accepting the phantom jelly's place in the catalog of deep-sea mysteries without demanding the rigorous proof we would require for terrestrial animals. The creature drifts through our consciousness much as it drifts through the ocean depths, real yet unreal, confirmed yet uncertain, a reminder that the deepest parts of our world may forever resist our attempts at complete understanding and classification. Perhaps it is this very resistance to understanding that makes the giant phantom jelly not merely a creature of scientific interest, but a symbol of humility itself, a living acknowledgement that mystery, rather than diminishing with knowledge, may only deepen and expand. In the deep waters of the Pacific Ocean, at depths between 2,000 and 3,000 feet below the surface where sunlight has never penetrated and pressure crushes with the weight of mountains, there exists a creature so peculiar and so fundamentally alien to our understanding of life that scientists still struggle to classify its exact nature and purpose in the marine ecosystem. The Pacific hagfish, a jawless eel-like organism measuring between 12 and 30 inches in length, possesses a biology so aberrant that it seems to violate our fundamental comprehension of how vertebrate creatures should function. This animal has no true backbone, no bone structure whatsoever, no vertebrae supporting its body, yet it swims through the absolute darkness with a sinuous grace that defies its own physiological limitations. What makes this creature truly disturbing, however, is not merely its appearance but its extraordinary defense mechanism, a survival strategy so violent and so effective that it transforms the very water around it into an impenetrable shield of viscous, ropey slime that can suffocate potential predators by clogging their gills and coating their mouths. When threatened, the hagfish releases mucus from specialized glands running along its entire body, producing a substance so abundant and so rapidly that a single hagfish can transform an entire cubic meter of water into thick, choking sludge within mere seconds. Yet this creature itself remains completely immune to its own secretions through unknown mechanisms that marine biologists have only begun to understand. The psychological terror that the Pacific hagfish generates stems from the fundamental wrongness of its existence in our minds, the way it represents a biological solution to survival that seems to violate the rules we believe should govern animal bodies, the way it demonstrates that nature operates according to principles far stranger than our categorical thinking allows. And the unsettling realization that here exists an animal that has thrived for millions of years in Earth's oceans, using a strategy so effective and so completely incomprehensible to us that we can barely fathom how such a creature came to be. Yet perhaps most disturbing is the hagfish's feeding behavior. It uses a toothed, disc-like mouth to bore into the flesh of dead and dying fish, consuming them from the inside out while the host creature still draws breath. A grotesque intimacy between predator and prey that suggests nature has engineered solutions to survival that operate entirely outside the moral framework through which humans perceive the natural world. In the depths of the ocean, where sunlight has never reached and the pressure would crush most living things instantly, there exists a creature that seems almost impossibly alien to our terrestrial understanding. The nautilus, a cephalopod that has remained virtually unchanged for hundreds of millions of years, drifting through the abyss like a living fossil from an ancient world. The nautilus inhabits the twilight zones of the deep sea, typically found at depths between 800 and 3,000 feet, where it moves with a grace and efficiency that defies the hostile environment surrounding it, propelling itself through the water by jet propulsion while its 30 or more tentacles, lined with sensitive chemoreceptors, search through the darkness for prey. What makes this creature so profoundly unsettling is not merely its existence, but rather our profound ignorance regarding the vast majority of its behavior, its intelligence, and its mysterious capabilities in an environment we can barely access or comprehend. The psychological unease stems from recognizing that this being has perfected survival in a realm so extreme that it forces us to reconsider our assumptions about what consciousness and awareness might truly mean, and whether creatures operating in such alien conditions might possess forms of intelligence utterly incomprehensible to our human perspective. We know the nautilus hunts, we know it reproduces, and we know it navigates using some combination of vision and chemosensory information. Yet the fundamental mechanics of how it processes its environment, how it makes decisions, and whether it possesses any form of self-awareness remain shrouded in mystery. Despite decades of scientific study, despite our advanced technologies and our increasing exploration of the ocean depths, the Nautilus continues to elude our complete understanding, and perhaps more disturbingly, we have largely accepted this ignorance as inevitable rather than as an indication of the profound limitations of human knowledge and perception themselves. In the rare footage captured of nautiluses in their natural habitat, we observe them moving through the darkness with apparent purpose and deliberation. Yet we cannot determine whether this behavior reflects genuine intention or merely the mechanical execution of ancient instincts refined over millions of years of evolution. This ambiguity, this inability to definitively separate conscious choice from programmed response, may ultimately reveal more about the limitations of our own frameworks for understanding intelligence than it does about the creature itself. In the crushing darkness of the ocean depths, where sunlight never penetrates and pressure would obliterate most surface-dwelling creatures, life has evolved in ways that challenge our understanding of biological limits, and among the most haunting of these adaptations is a phenomenon known as deep-sea gigantism, wherein creatures that would be considered relatively small in shallow waters grow to proportions that seem almost impossible given the constraints of their environment. The giant squid, reaching lengths of up to 43 feet with eyes the size of dinner plates, the colossal squid with its rotating hooks and armor-plated skin, the megamouth shark that dwarfs nearly every other filter feeder in existence, and countless species of amphipods, isopods, and jellyfish that tower over their shallow water cousins, all represent a fundamental shift in how organisms allocate their biological resources when confined to the deepest reaches of the ocean. Scientists have proposed numerous explanations for this mysterious tendency toward gigantism in the abyss, suggesting that the colder temperatures in the deep reduce metabolic rates and allow creatures to grow larger without requiring proportionally more food, that the scarcity of predators in certain deep zones eliminates selective pressure against large body sizes, and that the increased pressure itself may somehow facilitate or permit the development of larger frames. Yet despite these rational frameworks and decades of research, the precise mechanisms remain incompletely understood and continue to inspire both scientific fascination and an almost primal sense of unease. What strikes observers most profoundly is that we have normalized this phenomenon into our scientific literature and museum displays, treating these colossal beings as though they represent merely another point on a spectrum of evolutionary adaptation, when in reality their existence in the abyssal depths, moving silently through waters where no human has ever ventured, and where the darkness is absolute and eternal, challenges the boundaries of what we thought possible for life itself to achieve. And we accept this normalization without fully acknowledging the unsettling implications of sharing our planet with creatures whose true behavior and ecology remain almost entirely mysterious to us. We catch only fleeting glimpses of these creatures, a specimen hauled up in a fishing net, a blurry video from a deep-sea camera, and even these fragments suggest that the abyss harbors giants whose full scope and behavior may forever elude our understanding, reminding us that Earth's most extreme environments remain profoundly alien to human experience. In the midnight zone of the ocean, where sunlight has been extinct for thousands of meters and pressure crushes with the weight of mountains, there exists a creature so peculiar that it defies the very logic of survival itself. The Blood jelly, scientifically known as Atolla Jellyfish, is a bioluminescent jellyfish that drifts through the perpetual darkness at depths between 200 and 900 meters, and what makes this creature genuinely unsettling is not what it does, but what it appears to be doing to itself. This jellyfish possesses a body that is almost entirely transparent, allowing light to pass through its gelatinous form without obstruction. Yet it has evolved a brilliant red pigmentation in its stomach and reproductive organs, creating a deep crimson mass visible within its otherwise invisible body. The reason for this coloration is paradoxical and haunting, because in the deep sea where bioluminescence is the primary language of light, most creatures produce blue light, as this wavelength travels farthest through the water column. The blood-ebony jelly, however, has made itself into a walking contradiction by developing red pigmentation that absorbs blue light rather than reflecting it, rendering its stomach and vital organs completely invisible to any creature viewing it through the blue luminescence that dominates the abyss. Yet despite this evolutionary advantage, the jellyfish surrounds its entire bell with a ring of bioluminescent photophores that produce a brilliant blue light. And this is where the mystery deepens into something almost existentially troubling. The creature appears to be advertising its own presence through this glowing ring, drawing attention to itself in an environment where invisibility should be the ultimate survival strategy. And marine biologists remain genuinely uncertain whether this behavior represents a hunting mechanism, a mating signal, or some form of defense that we do not yet comprehend. What persists most unnervingly is that despite decades of study and observation, the blood-ebony jelly continues to maintain this contradictory existence, simultaneously hiding its vital organs in deep red while broadcasting its location with bright blue light, and we have simply accepted this paradox as part of the natural order. Incorporating it into our understanding of the deep sea, without truly resolving the fundamental question of why it chooses to remain both invisible and impossibly visible at once. In the absolute darkness of the deep ocean, where sunlight has never penetrated and pressure crushes with the weight of mountains, exists a creature so perfectly adapted to its hostile environment that it seems almost designed by the abyss itself. The lantern shark, a small deepwater shark measuring no more than 20 inches in length, possesses a characteristic that defies our conventional understanding of predatory behavior in the abyss. Its entire body is covered in photophores, tiny light-producing organs that emit a faint bioluminescent glow in the perpetual midnight of the deep. These creatures dwell at depths between 2,000 and 3,000 feet below the surface, in regions so remote and inhospitable that fewer humans have witnessed a living lantern shark than have traveled to the surface of the moon. What makes the lantern shark particularly unsettling is not merely its alien appearance or its bioluminescent coating, but rather the profound mystery surrounding the precise function of its light-producing organs and how such an energy-expensive adaptation persists in an environment where calories are extraordinarily scarce. Scientists theorize that the lantern shark uses its photophores for counterillumination, matching the faint downwelling light from the surface to render itself invisible to predators hunting from below, or alternatively for communication with others of its kind in the absolute darkness. Yet these explanations remain largely speculative, based on inference rather than direct observation. The creature's existence in such extreme conditions, combined with the fact that we understand so little about its actual behavior and ecology, speaks to a broader truth about our ocean world. That vast regions of our planet harbor life forms operating under principles so foreign to our terrestrial experience that we may never fully comprehend their strategies for survival. The lantern shark continues to glide through the deep with its constellation of tiny lights blazing across its skin, a living mystery that reminds us how little authority we actually possess over understanding the natural world, even as we progress technologically, because some secrets of the abyss seem deliberately hidden from human comprehension. Yet perhaps this opacity is not a failing of human science, but rather a gift, a reminder that wonder itself requires distance, and that the lantern shark's ability to elude our understanding is as vital to its existence as the photophores that illuminate its skin in an ocean where darkness is the only constant. In this way, the lantern shark becomes not merely a subject of scientific study, but a symbol of the ocean's sovereignty, a creature that teaches us humility through its refusal to be fully known. The midnight zone, also known as the bathypelagic zone, begins at approximately 1,000 meters below the ocean's surface and extends down to around 4,000 meters, representing a realm of absolute darkness where sunlight has never penetrated and where the pressure becomes so intense that it would crush a human body instantly into an unrecognizable form. In this lightless expanse, temperatures hover just above freezing, and the water itself becomes increasingly dense as depth increases, creating an environment so hostile that it seems impossible that anything could survive there, yet life persists in forms we barely understand. The creatures that inhabit this zone have evolved in complete isolation from the sun's energy, developing bioluminescent displays that serve as their only source of light, creating an otherworldly communication system where creatures flash and glow in the darkness as if performing an eternal, silent conversation with unseen neighbors. The psychological weight of contemplating this zone stems from its absolute inaccessibility to human experience, for we are creatures of light and air, bound by our biology to remain forever unable to directly witness what transpires in these crushing depths without extensive technological equipment that itself becomes unreliable as depth increases. What unsettles us most profoundly is the realization that we have explored less than 5% of the ocean's volume, meaning that an area larger than all the world's continents combined remains completely unknown to us, filled with organisms we have never catalogued and phenomena we cannot yet comprehend. Yet despite this vast knowledge gap, we have somehow normalized our ignorance, treating the Midnight Zone as merely another geographic location to be studied from a distance, rather than confronting the genuine terror of sharing our planet with an entirely alien biosphere that operates according to rules we do not understand, where bioluminescent creatures perform their mysterious dances in eternal darkness, indifferent to humanity's existence. In the rare moments when our instruments capture footage of these bioluminescent exchanges, a viperfish's needle teeth gleaming, a squid's sudden color shift, the geometric perfection of a jellyfish's pulsing bell, we are granted fleeting glimpses of a consciousness so fundamentally different from our own that we cannot help but wonder if we are witnessing intelligence, ritual, or something for which we have no adequate language at all. In the deepest trenches of our ocean, where pressures exceed 800 times that of the surface and sunlight has never penetrated, there exists a creature so perfectly adapted to its extreme environment that it challenges our understanding of biological possibility itself. The snailfish, a translucent and gelatinous organism, dwells in these abyssal depths where temperatures hover just above freezing and the darkness is absolute and eternal. What makes this creature particularly unsettling to contemplate is not what we know about it, but rather the inverse. Nearly everything about its existence remains fundamentally mysterious to us. Scientists have observed these organisms in the Mariana Trench, the Kermadec Trench, and other deep ocean chasms, yet our observations are fleeting and incomplete, gathered through brief robotic expeditions that capture only fragmentary glimpses of their behavior before the creatures drift back into the impenetrable darkness from which they came. The psychological mechanism that makes the snailfish especially disquieting is the realization that we share our planet with an entire ecosystem of life forms about which we possess almost no concrete understanding. The snailfish represents a reminder that vast portions of Earth remain completely unknown to us, not because of technological limitations alone, but because these creatures exist in conditions so hostile and alien that even our most advanced exploration methods can barely scratch the surface of comprehension. We have mapped the surface of the moon with greater precision than we have mapped the ocean floor where these organisms live. Yet despite this profound ignorance, despite the fact that snailfish remain among the least understood vertebrates on Earth, we have somehow normalized this absence of knowledge. We accept that entire species and ecosystems exist in our deepest oceans, about which we may never gain meaningful understanding, and we continue our lives on the surface, largely unconcerned with the strange and ghostly life forms drifting silently through the crushing black waters below, adapting to pressures that would obliterate any surface creature in microseconds, existing in a realm so foreign to human experience that it might as well be another planet entirely. And yet, if we were to encounter a snailfish specimen in a laboratory, we would recognize it immediately as a fish, a creature governed by the same fundamental biological principles that guide all vertebrate life, which makes its alienness all the more profound. We share ancestry with this being, and yet comprehend it less than we comprehend distant galaxies observed through telescopes. Deep within the twilight zones of the ocean, where sunlight becomes nothing more than a distant memory and pressure crushes with the weight of mountains, exists a creature so unusual in its hunting strategy that it defies nearly every principle we understand about predation in the marine world. The predatory tunicate represents one of the ocean's most peculiar mysteries, a gelatinous organism that appears almost entirely passive and harmless to the casual observer, yet possesses a feeding mechanism so alien and aggressive that it seems borrowed from a creature of nightmare rather than from the gentle waters of the deep. These creatures, belonging to the class Appendicularia, are small barrel-shaped animals composed almost entirely of water, drifting through the darkness like transparent ghosts, and yet they maintain an appetite that far exceeds what their fragile bodies should logically require. What makes the predatory tunicate truly terrifying is not its appearance, which is undeniably delicate and ethereal, but rather the enormous mucus net it constructs and continuously replaces as it feeds, a net so vast compared to its own body size that the creature becomes little more than the living mechanism behind an apparatus of hunger. The tunicate secretes this elaborate filtering structure from specialized glands, weaving invisible walls of sticky mucus throughout the water column, and as organic particles, plankton, and smaller creatures become ensnared within this gelatinous web, the tunicate simply contracts and draws the entire saturated net into its mouth, consuming everything caught within before producing a fresh net and beginning the process anew. The psychological oddity of the predatory tunicate lies in how this creature has evolved to be almost entirely defined by its feeding apparatus rather than by its own body, becoming a ghost-like entity that exists primarily as the engineer of elaborate traps rather than as an active hunter. A strategy so fundamentally different from what we expect of predators that our minds struggle to categorize it as predation at all. Despite lacking a brain, sensory organs, or any apparent intelligence, the tunicate demonstrates a feeding efficiency that would be the envy of far more sophisticated creatures. Yet this contradiction between its neural simplicity and behavioral complexity has led to centuries of underestimation and misunderstanding, with many scientists dismissing these organisms as insignificant members of the plankton community. In the deepest trenches and continental shelves of our oceans, where sunlight becomes nothing more than a distant memory and pressure crushes all but the most resilient forms of life, there exists a creature so anatomically improbable that it challenges our fundamental understanding of how bodies should be structured and how organisms should function. The sea spider, scientifically known as a pycnogonid, is a marine arthropod that appears to violate every principle of physiological design we believe should govern living beings. These creatures possess an exoskeleton composed primarily of impossibly long, spindly legs that seem disproportionate to their tiny central body mass, often reaching lengths of several feet, while their torso remains no larger than a pinhead. What makes the sea spider truly unsettling is not merely its alien appearance, but rather the biological impossibility embedded within its very existence. These creatures lack a proper circulatory system, possessing no heart to pump blood through their elongated limbs, and yet they somehow survive in some of Earth's most extreme environments where even creatures with sophisticated biological machinery struggle to persist. The sea spider accomplishes nutrient distribution and oxygen transport through a process of simple diffusion and body cavity fluid movement, a mechanism so inefficient that larger terrestrial creatures employing identical systems would collapse under their own weight. Scientists have long puzzled over how such creatures manage metabolic demands across such vast distances relative to their body size. Yet the sea spiders continue to thrive in abyssal zones, reproducing and hunting along the ocean floor as though defying the very laws of biology we have spent centuries documenting. The psychological unease generated by the sea spider stems from recognizing that we have been fundamentally wrong about what constitutes a viable body plan, that nature operates according to principles far more flexible than our textbooks suggest, and that life finds purchase in the margins where our certainties collapse into uncertainty. We have normalized this impossibility by cataloging it, by assigning it a scientific name and filing it away in our mental databases. Yet each new discovery of sea spiders in previously unexplored depths reminds us that the ocean floor harbors organisms whose very existence contradicts established biological law. In 2022, researchers discovered sea spiders in the Mariana Trench exhibiting behaviors previously thought impossible at such depths, their leg spans exceeding 12 inches as they methodically preyed upon sea anemones in complete darkness, forcing marine biologists to fundamentally reconsider the metabolic efficiency of creatures that should, by every rational measure, simply cease to function.